Hello everyone. Today, we will learn about another case. The case of Chelsea Bruck. A party for 1,000 people seems like the perfect place to enjoy the festive atmosphere and have fun. However, horrors sometimes lurk just outside, bringing with them unsolved mysteries and hauntings. Chelsea Bruck was born in 1992 in Trenton, Michigan, USA. Her mother, Leanda, worked at a bank, while her father, Matthew, was a farmer. She is the youngest of 5 children. Chelsea has 3 older sisters, Jennifer, Megan, and Cassandra, and a brother named Nathaniel. She is especially close to Cassandra, who is only 2 years older than she is. But all of her siblings share a close and loving relationship. Chelsea's family exemplified a typical American household. They lived in a small town with a population of about 500 people, where everyone knew each other and crime rates were very low. Growing up on a 65-acre farm established in 1875 by her great-grandfather, Chelsea was raised in a supportive, religious environment with strong moral values. Her family also had been involved in agriculture for 4 generations. Chelsea attended a Christian school, where she spent her free time studying Catholic scriptures. Later, she transferred to Monroe Secondary School, which focused on sports, cheerleading, and football. After finishing her education, Chelsea continued to live on the farm with her parents and her sister, Cassandra. During this time, her older sisters got married and moved out. Chelsea had a passion for cooking and intended to attend culinary school to become a chef to gain experience. She took a job at a nearby restaurant called Olga's Kitchen, where she worked as an administrator and felt very happy in her role. Chelsea was a friendly, sociable, and attractive young woman. She loved to express her individuality, often dyeing her hair bright colors like pink and getting a small anchor tattoo behind her ear. When grown up, she maintained a close relationship with her parents. She didn't have a driver's license and wasn't particularly interested in getting one, as her parents always helped her with transportation. By the time she turned 22, she had worked for 4 years and developed a close circle of friends with whom she regularly connected. Chelsea loved going to parties, and one of her favorites was a rock concert organized by a local musician named Mike on his farm. Over the years, what started as a small gathering grew into a well-known event, attracting around 1,000 people, including attendees from neighboring states. Mike had his own band and also invited other local performers. This year, the concert was themed for Halloween and scheduled for October 25, 2014. In Newport, Michigan, which is about half an hour from Ferndale, Chelsea was excited about this big event and planned to attend with her friends Becky Brinson and Laura Taylor. At the event, Chelsea and her friends planned to dress as Poison Ivy from the Batman universe. Chelsea created the costume herself, using a swimsuit as the base and adding various details. After many nights of hard work, the final result was impressive. She crafted a costume that looked original and was worthy of first place. On Saturday, October 25, 2014, the friends gathered for the party. Laura drove them to the party, and they decided not to go home right after the event. Chelsea, now 22 years old, she intended to spend the night at Laura's place. She packed her things and set out for a fun evening. She plans to arrive at the concert around 10 p.m. However, it was still early, and the event had not yet started. Preparations were still in progress, but already hundreds of guests had gathered. Eager for a large-scale party, everything seemed well organized. There were several food and drink vendors, security guards, ensuring safety, and parking appeared secure. The girls, who had attended this event before, could not have imagined that this time it would turn into a nightmare. After parking the car, they walked toward the concert venue. Since Chelsea's costume had no pockets, she had to leave her mobile phone in the car to avoid losing it. Nearly 1,000 people attended the event, many dressed in elaborate costumes. Alcohol was abundant, and some attendees were under the influence of illegal substances. These things created a lively atmosphere. Most of the people were unknown to the girls, who who had gathered from different cities. But there were several familiar faces. Penny and her sister Heather, the group, had a strong bond, having known each other for many years, even though Penny was 10 years older than Chelsea and had her own children. They all felt the energy of the event and enjoyed it. When the rock concert finally began, everyone reveled in the loud music. Chelsea and her friends quickly immersed themselves in the lively atmosphere. They happily drank and danced with everyone. However, because they were too excited to play, Chelsea and her friends lost each other. The situation was further complicated because all the girls were tipsy and disoriented by the noise and chaos of the party, making it hard for them to keep track of everything. Laura tried to locate her friend but was unsuccessful. Becky and Laura weren't overly concerned because there were many acquaintances at the party. They assumed Chelsea was with someone from her circle and would get a ride home later. Around 1 a.m. on October 26, Laura decided to leave the party and go home, unable to find Chelsea in the crowd. Laura gave Chelsea's personal belongings to Becky and asked permission to leave first. Becky woke up early the next morning, aware that none of her friends had plans for that Sunday. They all assumed they would sleep off the effects of the night before. She tried to call Chelsea's mother to inform her that she had Chelsea's things, but couldn't get through. She went about her day, and later in the evening, Chelsea's sister, Cassandra, messaged her to say that Chelsea still hadn't come home. Becky responded that she was spending the night at Laura's place. Everyone felt relieved, thinking Chelsea was safe. But when Chelsea still hadn't returned by Monday, it raised concern. Chelsea's relatives reached out to Laura, but they hadn't heard from Chelsea either. They began contacting all their friends who had attended and find that none of them had seen Chelsea since they lost track of each other that night. Chelsea hadn't communicated with anyone and don't post anything on social media, which heightened her family's concern. In a state of panic, they went to the Monroe County Police Station to report Chelsea missing. Initially, the police were reluctant to take the case because Chelsea was an adult, 22 years old, who had the right to make her own decisions, including leaving without informing her family. However, her relatives insisted that a search for Chelsea be initiated. Her mother feared that something terrible had happened to her. Immediately after that, detectives began looking into the circumstances surrounding Chelsea's disappearance and defined a search area between Newport and her family farm. As the search efforts continued, detectives sought the assistance of Mike, a rock performer and party organizer, and brought him in for questioning. He agreed to come to the police station to provide his account. Mike was not well acquainted with Chelsea and claimed he had no knowledge of her whereabouts. He did not arouse any suspicion, so he was allowed to go home. The detectives then spoke with the security guards who were present at the event. They stated that they hadn't noticed anything unusual. However, Chelsea's relatives suspected that Mike knew more than he was letting on, so they went directly to his house in search of information about their daughter. They intrusively entered his property, where the party had taken place, and began searching for clues themselves. When tensions escalated quickly, Mike permitted law enforcement to enter his area, wanting to avoid any implication of wrongdoing. Despite the organized search, the authorities found nothing relevant to the investigation. There were no leads. The detectives continued to interview attendees of the Halloween party, but it proved challenging to gather information, as it was a costume event where everyone wore masks and consumed alcohol. These were young people eager to make a name for themselves as a result of their conversations with the party guests. The detectives received hundreds of conflicting statements. Many of these claims were difficult to verify and took a considerable amount of time to investigate. Most of the information turned out to be false, likely due to confusion among people. However, some individuals seemed to purposely exaggerate their stories to gain attention. Some of the statements are completely absurd. One partygoer claimed that a girl could have been kidnapped for slavery, while another suggested that a satanic ritual was taking place. With the possibility of someone being burned alive, the case quickly gained widespread attention. Information, rumors, and falsehoods spread rapidly among local residents. The media was filled with alarming headlines. including wild speculations about victims of satanic rituals. This situation deeply affected the family of Chelsea and Mike, despite the outrageous nature of some claims. The police had to investigate all theories presented by the guests. They discovered that there had indeed been a fire near the stage, reaching heights of 15 to 20 meters. After examining the area, they confirmed that no human remains were found. Ruling out the possibility of ritual murder, the search lasted several days and involved many volunteers, but no evidence was discovered. The friends of Chelsea felt responsible for her disappearance since they had left her alone that night and hadn't begun searching for her earlier. They kept a close eye on her social media accounts, hoping to find clues about Chelsea's whereabouts since she was alone. Her boyfriend was not considered the main suspect, however. The police interviewed all the young men who had any connection to Chelsea in recent years, searched their cars, and collected DNA samples from those individuals. During this time, rock singer Mike allowed a command center for the search operation to be set up on his farm and supported the police in every way he could. He even provided a generator so the search team could have electricity. A tent camp was established for volunteers and those concerned about Chelsea's disappearance, including her family and friends. The search for Chelsea continued almost around the clock. But there was little progress, despite the warm welcome and extensive help Mike provided to the investigation. Detectives remained suspicious of him. This was mainly due to his reluctance to communicate, which led them to believe he was hiding something. However, it was understandable why he felt this way, given the intrusive nature of the police presence on his property. Ultimately, all of Mike's belongings were searched, but nothing incriminating was found. The police suspect him of involvement in the incident because, before, when the police arrived, Mike was tackled to the ground, and they even threatened to shoot his dog. The reason for this incident was that when the police arrived, they found Mike covered in blood. It was later revealed that he had gotten dirty while rescuing his dog, which had fallen into a trap and was badly injured. He had carried the animal out of the woods in his arms. Mike was primarily at fault for hosting a party without ensuring the safety of his guests. As a result, he faced criticism from Chelsea's family and the police. Detectives learned from Gavin Hewlett, who provided new details to the investigators. He mentioned that a girl in the poison ivy costume was also looking for her friends after she had gone missing. She approached other party guests, asking about Laura, but no one offered to help. Distressed, she started to cry, and Gavin offered her his cell phone around 1 a.m. Unfortunately, she was unable to reach anyone and only managed to borrow a small amount of money. Chelsea felt very sad about losing her friends and being left alone. She declined his offer for a ride. Witnesses from the party reported that Chelsea arrived at the parking lot but felt stranded. Her belongings, including her phone, were left in the car, leaving her unable to contact anyone or find her friends. Consequently, around 2:45 a.m., Chelsea walked onto the gravel road leading from the parking lot, hoping to find someone she knew for a ride home. Although several people offered her assistance, she chose to decline their help and continued walking alone. This was the last time anyone saw her alive. Many attendees recorded videos and took photos at the party. The police gathered all available materials from the partygoers and are now analyzing thousands of images and videos. Some witnesses mentioned a man selling t-shirts that night. They were searching for him not as a suspect, but as a potential witness who might have seen Chelsea. When officers located the t-shirt seller, he reported that he indeed saw a girl in a bright poison ivy costume, making her hard to miss. He gave to provide the police with some helpful information that a man wearing a sweatshirt and hoodie approached Chelsea, and they engaged in conversation around 3 a.m. She left with him. Their interaction seemed friendly, and they did not hug or flirt. This man was captured on multiple security cameras in the area. Using these recordings and the account of the t-shirt vendor, a forensic artist created a sketch of the man who may have been the last person to see Chelsea alive. This sketch was released to the media, along with a reward for any information that could assist in solving the case. The reward fund gradually increased from $5,000 to $30,000. Leaflets were widely distributed, and Monroe County was filled with photographs of Chelsea by that time. Approximately 300 leaflets had been handed out. Every community had posters featuring her photo, and the leaflets were even included with pizza deliveries. The police station began receiving calls from local residents with tips. Many leads were reported. Data was analyzed, and around 1,000 interviews were conducted. But none of this resulted in significant progress. A breakthrough in the case occurred in 2015, just before the new year. When a woman named Cree Carr contacted the police department, she reported that her boyfriend had confessed to killing Chelsea. Cree had confronted her boyfriend, who threatened her with a knife, and during this confrontation, he revealed that it was the same knife he used to kill the girl in the poison ivy costume. She managed to escape from him as he intended to chase her and her child when knowing about the high-profile case of Chelsea's disappearance. Cree wanted to assist in the investigation. The police were suspecting that the caller might be seeking revenge. As similar cases had occurred in the past, however, they could not completely disregard her call, so they decided to investigate during their inquiries. They discovered that the report was false. Cree up being one of 2 people arrested by the police, evidence showed that she was indeed a former acquaintance of Chelsea. The second individual detained was Harlan, a 19-year-old who claimed he intervened in a situation where 2 men were harassing Chelsea. He said attempting to rescue her before she was pulled into the fields. Later, Harlan confessed that his story was fabricated, and then the police received another call on March 22, 2015. A woman was cleaning her yard after winter when she found a red leather shoe without thinking. She discarded it in a garbage bag. Later that evening, her husband noticed the shoe and inquired about it. She explained how she found it while cleaning. He suggested that the shoe might be linked to Chelsea's disappearance, as she had been last seen wearing red shoes. Their home was located 7 kilometers from the party. Police had previously searched this area multiple times, and the couple was shocked that the searchers had overlooked the distinctive red shoe. Confused by the situation, she contacted the police to report her discovery. When officers arrived, they examined the area and the shoe. They confirmed that it closely resembled one belonging to the missing Chelsea. However, they found nothing else nearby. It turned out that this area had not been thoroughly searched before. The searchers were pressed for time and could not conduct a proper investigation before winter set in, and the snow later covered any potential evidence. As a result, the search was essentially ineffective. Soon after, another significant find was made. On the 15th, Eric Kassap was collecting scrap metal with friends when he stumbled upon a red wig while sorting through some debris near the railroad tracks. This wig was identical to one Chelsea had worn on the night she disappeared. Initially, Eric did not contact the police, although he was aware of the missing girl. He had not paid attention to her accessory. A week later, he saw another news report about the search for Chelsea wearing the same outfit and realized that his discovery might be more important than he had first thought. He began to suspect it could indeed be linked to her disappearance. Despite his initial hesitation, he did not report the discovery to the police right away because he was worried that his DNA might be on the costume. He eventually told his sister about the costume, and she insisted that he inform the police. A week later, Eric reported the items he had found to the sheriff's department. The police went to the location he specified and discovered a carnival costume and Chelsea's wig. As a result, Eric became the main suspect. He shared all the necessary information with the police, including his DNA samples, and maintained that he had never met Chelsea. The investigators pressed him for details, but he continued to deny any involvement. Eric agreed to take a polygraph test and passed it successfully. Meanwhile, forensic experts examined the outfit. They found that the straps had been torn off, indicating that someone had forcibly removed them from the girl, and the leggings were completely ripped. A forensic analysis of the poison ivy suit revealed brown stains that resembled blood. Further testing confirmed that the stains were indeed blood and belonged to Chelsea. By that time, over 1 million flyers had been distributed, but there was still no significant progress in the case. On April 24, 2015, John Markin was preparing his 5-hectare plot, which was densely forested. For construction, this location was close to where Chelsea's clothes had been discovered and not far from the site of a nearby rock concert. During the construction work, a bulldozer became stuck in a muddy area when the driver got out to investigate. He observed what looked like a human skeleton. He alerted the other workers, who confirmed it was indeed a badly decomposed human body without a face. Construction was immediately halted, and the frightened workers contacted the police. The driver informed the dispatchers that he had found human remains. John suspected it might be Chelsea, who was the focus of an extensive search in the vicinity. A piece of the remain clothing had been found, and the remain had light hair. When police to arrive at the scene, where they discovered a remain hidden in the underbrush and covered with branches and leaves. Right away, they were sent for forensic examination, and dental records were used to identify the body as that of Chelsea. The forensic expert concluded that Chelsea suffered a brutal death. Her murder was particularly cruel. Her jaw was severely disfigured, literally broken in two, and the bones around her eyes and nose were crushed. Many of her teeth were also knocked out. The cause of death was determined to be a head injury from a strong blow with a blunt object. Additionally, evidence indicated that she had been abused before her death. DNA from the perpetrator was found on Chelsea's body and entered into the police database. But there were no matches. Due to the poor condition of the body, more information could not be obtained. Therefore, the investigation for some time reached a dead end until 2016. When a DNA match was found in the police database, it belonged to Daniel Clay from Monroe County. His DNA was included in the database due to issues related to child support. Daniel had a troubled childhood. His mother was incarcerated shortly after his birth, and he was raised by foster parents in a local orphanage. He later developed a substance abuse problem after failing to secure stable employment. One of his former girlfriends became pregnant, but he denied paternity and did not provide child support. Daniel had a history of criminal behavior, harassment of women, and banned substance trafficking. Yet for some reason, his DNA had not been collected for the police database until now. On July 22, 2016, the police were driving the guy, who tried to escape but was caught. Daniel was taken in for questioning. Initially, he thought the police were investigating him for child support issues, but the detectives quickly shifted the focus to Chelsea's murder. He admitted to being at that Halloween party, but said he left early and denied having any connection to Chelsea, claimed he had never seen her before. Of course, the police officer did not believe him, as posters of Chelsea were displayed everywhere, making it impossible for Daniel not to know about her disappearance. However, he could not explain how his DNA ended up on the clothes and body of Chelsea. Investigators started using more sophisticated techniques to gather information. They employed a good cop, bad cop approach, which led to changes in the suspect's story. He admitted that he had forgotten some details, but he claimed that at a party, he had intimate with an unknown girl. He described her as wearing some kind of suit and said he didn't get a good look at her. The suspect mentioned that he got into a car with her, and after their encounter, they parted ways. However, this statement is obtained because he mistakenly believed that male fluids were found on the remains. In fact, the police did not locate any such fluid, but they did find his skin cells on Chelsea's remains, and on the straps of the poison ivy suit. His DNA was also discovered on the leggings, which were torn along the seam. This evidence suggested that the act was not consensual, and the police had not informed him about any intimate contact with the victim. Only a small group of investigators was aware of this information. Daniel eventually admitted to the crime after the suspect changed his story multiple times. Initially, he completely denied knowing Chelsea and claimed he had not been with anyone that night. However, during another interrogation, his account shifted again. This time, Daniel stated that he did intimate with a girl he met while leaving the parking lot. She got into his car and started flirting with him, although he initially responded to her advances. He soon became aggressive during their encounter. She asked him to bite, hit, and strangle her. He complied and strangled her for several seconds. Afterward, he realized she was unresponsive despite his attempts to revive her. She had no pulse. In shock and panic, Daniel drove for about half an hour along forest roads, trying to figure out what to do. Eventually, he disposed of her body in a remote area near an abandoned site. He could not explain why her clothes were found far from the body. Overall, his story was seen as absurd and unbelievable. Leading no one to trust his account, Daniel created an elaborate web of lies that ultimately led the police to lose patience and charge him with the murder of Chelsea. He claimed her death was an accidental result of a moment of passion, insisting on his innocence until the end. However, the medical examiner contradicted his claims, stating that the actual cause of death was a blow to the head from a blunt object, exposing his entire narrative as false. Daniel's girlfriend testified in court, saying she had never seen any signs of cruelty in him and found it hard to believe he could commit such an act. Meanwhile, another woman revealed that Daniel had confessed to her about the murder. The prosecutor argued that, on the night of the incident, Daniel spotted Chelsea walking alone and defenseless. He deceived her into getting into his car, then abused and brutally beat her to death. They was unable to clarify why the girl's suit and wig were found in one location. One shoe was found in another, and her body was discovered in yet another place. There were many unanswered questions in this case. But the key point is that Chelsea's body was recovered and the perpetrator was apprehended. To counter Daniel's false testimony, a special dummy was used to demonstrate how someone could be strangled for a few seconds right in front of the jury. It was shown that his claim was false because, in reality, it takes more than 3 minutes of pressure on the neck to cause death, which left a strong impact on the jury. Additionally, the prosecutor reiterated the injuries inflicted on Chelsea by Daniel. The brutality of the killer was evident in the manner in which he caused these injuries. It became clear that such a heinous act could not have been committed by chance. Daniel was found guilty of both abuse and murder, resulting in a life sentence without the possibility of parole, along with an additional 75 years for other acts of violence against women. Incredibly, Leanda surprisingly revealed in a media interview that she has forgiven her daughter's killer. She even gifted him a Bible, which he promised to keep. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Molly Martins Corbett. On February 12, 1976, Jason Corbett was born in Limerick, Ireland. His family was very happy, and he was one of 8 children raised by his parents, Rita and John. Jason had a twin brother named Wayne when his father lost his job. Jason quickly took a part-time job as a security guard at the school sports center. He was eager to earn extra money to support his family. Jason was loved by his family and respected by his friends. He was intelligent and easygoing. Jason met Margaret Fitzpatrick. They later got married and welcomed their first child in September 2004, a son named Jack. 2 years later, they had a daughter. Sarah, Margaret, and Jason lived happily together and raised their children together. However, their happy life took a tragic turn on November 21, 2006, just 3 months after Sarah was born. That night, Margaret woke up and felt an asthma attack begin. Previously, a nebulizer had helped her, but this time, the medication did not work. Jason rushed her to the hospital, but unfortunately, they lost precious time and did not arrive in time. Margaret passed away. Jason was extremely sad after losing his wife. He could not imagine how deep the grief was, especially when he was faced with the challenge of raising 2 young children alone. He felt as if he had lost everything, but he knew that his son and daughter were waiting for him at home. This realization forced him to be strong for them, instead of succumbing to despair. Jason tried to hold on for his children, which gave him the strength to continue. Jason's relatives tried their best to support him, although he appreciated their help. Jason did not want to be a burden to his family. He decided to hire a nanny in 2007. The first woman who came to help was Czech, but they had difficulty communicating, and he had to let her go. He then hired a Spanish woman, but she did not speak English, which Jason had trouble with. In addition, both women were looking for temporary work, and Jason wanted to find someone more stable. He needed a long-term nanny who could be a part of his children's lives and provide reliable support for the family. After careful consideration, Jason concluded that hiring an English-speaking nanny who was looking for permanent employment would be the best solution. In early February 2008, he received an email from Molly Martins Corbett, a 20-year-old woman. She attached a resume that was later found to contain false information. Molly claimed to have graduated from Clemson University. Although she had actually dropped out, she also claimed that she had passed a test and was licensed to be a foster parent, which was also not true. Molly had a tendency to lie frequently and was often caught in the act. However, Jason did not know this and believed that he had found the right person. Molly agreed to move to Ireland to care for Sarah and Jack. She lived in Knoxville, Tennessee, and flew to Ireland on March 10, 2008. Things did not start well for Molly when she arrived at customs. She was refused entry because she had only purchased a one-way ticket. This caused complications with immigration because she could not confirm how long she would be staying or provide a special work visa. Eventually, he was able to resolve the issues and was allowed to enter the country. Jason asked a good friend of his to pick Molly up at the airport. The friend later said that, when she first met Molly, she felt that the young woman might not be right for Jason. Molly was attractive and dressed very formally, almost as if she were competing for a beauty pageant rather than working. However, Sarah and Jack quickly got used to Molly, and things seemed to go well. Molly looked after the children, and Jason felt very comfortable. Over time, Molly and Jason developed a closer relationship, and Jason began to ask her out on dates. However, it is important to mention Molly's American boyfriend, Keith. They were together for years until Molly decided to work in Ireland. Her ex-boyfriend, Keith, claimed that they had not officially broken up before she moved. He also alleged that Molly had mental health issues and had just been released from a psychiatric hospital. According to Keith, she was not in a position to move to another country and look after children who had lost their mother. Molly had told Keith that she would be staying in Ireland temporarily, which was strange because she had told Jason that she wanted to be a housekeeper for a long time. After 2 weeks in Ireland, Molly informed Keith that she would not be returning. The news devastated him. Keith felt betrayed. It seemed that Molly had made a firm decision to cut Keith out of her life, which hurt him deeply. Jason felt reassured that Molly was getting along with his children and that everything seemed to be going well. The children were growing attached to Molly, and everything seemed fine. However, Tracy, Jason's sister, realized that Molly had some suspicious points. Molly did not want to discuss her past in America, no matter how they asked. She always answered vaguely, as if she was hiding the truth. The couple's relationship progressed quickly, but Jason emailed Molly and asked her to return to house for a while. He expressed in the email that he felt their relationship was moving too fast and admitted that he was not ready for a second marriage. This upset Molly, and she responded with some harsh words. In the end, they decided to stay together, but Jason wanted Molly to find another apartment and a new job. Molly agreed to this, but in the end, she never moved out and continued to live in Jason's house. One day, she expressed that she no longer wanted to live in the house where his ex-wife Margaret used to live. After much persuasion, Jason agreed and sold the house. On Valentine's Day, 2010, he proposed to Molly. He truly loved her, and, most importantly, he was sure that the children loved her too. The couple got engaged, and their life together became lively and joyful. Eventually, Molly said that she missed her homeland and wanted to leave Ireland, suggesting that the family moved to the United States. Jason's family then moved to North Carolina, where they bought a house. The wedding took place on June 4, 2011, in Nishi. Molly's father, Thomas Martins, escorted her down the aisle. While Jack and Sarah carried the ring and flowers, the photos taken that day capture the joyful atmosphere. However, there are some important details to consider. Molly claimed to her friends that she and Margaret were friends before Margaret's death. This is not true, as Margaret died in 2006, and Molly did not know Jason or his wife before that. Molly's tendency to spread misinformation is worrying. During the wedding, she also threw a tantrum over the McDonald's food Jason's nephew was eating. The boy had food allergies and could not eat from the communal table. One of the guests noticed this, went to McDonald's and bought the child some snacks. This angered Molly, who reacted violently and lost her temper several times. Years later, Jason's family still lives in North Carolina, and the kids call Molly Mommy. Molly works part-time as a swim instructor and spends most of her free time at home with the kids. Meanwhile, Jason works long hours as a manager at a packaging plant. The couple has made many new friends, and Jason is well liked for his kindness and friendliness. He is often seen chatting with neighbors or hanging out with friends. Although things seem to be going well for them, there are actually some underlying problems in their marriage. One of the biggest problems is that Molly wants to adopt a child, but Jason is against the idea. He refuses his wife's request, not out of anger, but perhaps because he doubts the longevity of their relationship over time. Jason begins to seriously consider divorce and the possibility of moving back to Ireland with his son and daughter. Realizing that their relationship is not healthy, Jason hid the children's passports. Worried that she might take them away, Molly sought legal advice about her parental rights in the event of a divorce. As she was not the biological mother of their children, Molly then deliberately made a recording. On the advice of her lawyer during their argument, the recording was intended to prove that Jason was a bad or even abusive father, which would aid Molly's efforts to gain custody of Sarah and Jack to gather evidence. Molly secretly placed recording devices around the house to record Jason during one of his tantrums. As a result, she was left with audio files that portrayed him in a negative light. During one dinner, Molly deliberately provoked Jason, causing him to lose his temper, while she accused him of ignoring her and refusing to listen. This argument was recorded in front of their children, making Jason appear to be an abusive husband and father. On the morning of August 2, Molly's parents, Thomas and Sharon, traveled to North Carolina to visit family. They arrived late at 8:30 p.m. Just in time for dinner, they planned to give the children the gifts they had prepared the following morning. This was especially meaningful for Jack, who would receive a baseball bat, while Sarah would receive a tennis racket after dinner. Thomas and Sharon went to the guest bedroom in the basement, while Jason and Molly went to the master bedroom on the first floor. The children went to their room on the second floor, according to Molly. Sarah woke her up at 3 a.m. after having a nightmare. Molly then took Sarah to her room and covered her with a blanket. However, when Molly returned, Jason was awake and very angry. Apparently because he had been disturbed in the middle of the night, his anger caused a fight. Shortly after the fight allegedly began, Thomas heard strange noises coming from his daughter Molly's bedroom. Worried, he grabbed a baseball bat and entered the room. When he opened the door, he found Jason holding Molly by the neck. When he recognized Thomas, Jason grabbed Molly by the neck, dragging her into the bathroom. While threatening to kill her, Thomas begged Jason to let her go. But when he realized his pleas were in vain, he charged at Jason and knocked him to the ground after being beaten. Jason continued to strangle Molly. Thomas continued to beat Jason. Jason then released Molly to grab the bat and tried to pull it away. A struggle ensued, and Jason pushed Thomas, causing him to fall to the floor. Jason tried to grab the bat, and at that moment, Molly shouted angrily at Jason not to hurt her father, fearing that Jason might kill her father. Molly picked up a brick from the nightstand and smashed it into Jason's head. Molly and her father took turns attacking Jason until they realized he was dead. Thomas then called the police to report the incident. Thomas told the police that Jason had been fighting with his wife, and Thomas had intervened. Now, Jason was in dire need of help when the police and ambulance arrived at the scene. They found that the incident was much more brutal than self-defense. Jason had many serious injuries on his body. Thomas and Molly claimed that they had killed Jason to ensure that he no longer posed a threat. However, considering the severity of Jason's injuries, it appears that some of them occurred when Jason was no longer a threat. Fortunately, the children were asleep and did not hear the noise. The police removed them from the chaotic scene and placed them in a patrol car. One of the officers reported that when they found Molly, she was crying loudly but had no tears. She was rubbing her neck and said that her neck hurt because Jason had tried to strangle her. Aside from a small red mark on her throat, Molly had no other injuries, and neither did Thomas. Although he claimed that they had gotten into a violent fight over a baseball bat, Molly and Thomas were taken to the police station to give formal statements. Molly claimed that she and her father killed Jason in self-defense because he had attacked her. She explained that he had been drinking heavily that day and was angry when he was woken up in the night. Molly could not recall specific details after the initial brick attack, but insisted that everything she and her father did was in self-defense. She also claimed that she had been abused by her husband for years, but kept quiet for fear of losing custody of her children. The investigation found no evidence of physical abuse against Molly during her stay with Jason. Recordings from Molly showed that Jason had a bad temper, but he could not be considered cruel to his wife. Thomas's testimony was consistent with his daughter's. He also noted that Jason had been drunk that night. Thomas also claimed that Jason's first wife had died under suspicious circumstances, which was completely false and insulting. In fact, Jason's first wife had died of an asthma attack. As confirmed by medical experts, when Tracy heard about her brother Jason's death, she quickly flew to the United States to speak to the police. She expressed her belief that Molly may not have been completely truthful in her account, and the police shared her suspicions. Tracy confirmed that her brother had intended to divorce Molly and move back to Ireland with the children. This could have been a motive for the murder. On August 3, the day after Jason's death, an autopsy was performed. Medical experts found that Jason had died from blunt force trauma to the head, including multiple lacerations, abrasions, and bruises, along with severe skull fractures from blunt force trauma. The injuries were so severe that the medical examiner was unable to determine exactly how many times he had been hit, but it was clear that he had been hit at least 12 times. Then a shocking analysis by a toxicologist, Molly claimed that Jason had been drinking all day, but tests showed that his blood alcohol level was very low. What was particularly strange was that traces of antidepressants were found in his system. The medication had been prescribed to Molly just days before Jason's death. Additionally, Jason had recently told his doctor that he was experiencing sudden, unexplained anger, although this has not been confirmed. Jason's family members suspect that Molly may have given him his drugs during this time. The children were placed in temporary care of Molly's brother. However, on August 3, Jack and Sarah were brought in to speak to social workers. It is hoped that the children may provide insight into their parents' dysfunctional marriage. Jack and Sarah revealed that their father was always angry and even hurt Molly. Additionally, Jack revealed important information about a brick on the nightstand in the master bedroom that had not been there before. The police were surprised, but Molly explained that she and the children had planned to paint the brick and place it outside. Apparently, the family had an artistic agenda, and Molly had brought the brick into the house after it had rained. However, one has to wonder why she did not leave it in the hallway or by the door. Instead, it was in the bedroom, right next to the bed, which seemed odd. Shortly thereafter, Molly sought custody of Jack and Sarah, alleging that Tracy had attempted to kidnap the children. This request granted her temporary custody, however. The details of the alleged kidnapping were unclear. A hearing was held to resolve the matter, and custody was eventually awarded to Tracy and her husband. According to Jason's will, the conflict between Molly and Jason's family was extremely tense regarding the handling of Jason's remains. Molly wanted him cremated immediately, while Tracy wanted his body returned to Ireland for burial. Molly eventually agreed to the burial, but only if her sister paid for the entire funeral expenses. Jason's body was then returned to his homeland. Initially, Jason's family was very worried that Thomas and Molly would avoid responsibility, but they were arrested. On December 18, 2015, a grand jury indicted Thomas Martins and Molly Martins on charges of second-degree murder and negligent manslaughter. Neither of them admitted guilt. A joint trial was set for June 2017. Before the trial, Molly gave an interview to a television channel in which she reiterated her claims of Jason's abuse and asserted her innocence in his death. However, at this point, Jack and Sarah changed their original statements. They claimed that their father was not abusive and that they had been coerced into lying. This development further complicated the situation, as no testimony from the children was considered admissible in court, giving neither the prosecution nor the defense an advantage. Both sides presented forensic evidence in court, including crime scene photographs and medical evidence, to prove that Jason had been brutally murdered. The prosecution pointed to Jason's $600 life insurance policy and pointed out that he had not formally adopted Molly, suggesting a strong motive for the crime. The defense portrayed Jason as a terrible person and a cruel husband. Molly chose not to speak in her defense, which may have worked in her favor. The trial lasted until August 9, 2017, and after 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Molly Martins and Thomas Martins guilty and sentenced them to 20 to 25 years in prison. A week later, Thomas and Molly filed an appeal, arguing that the jury had acted improperly. Specifically, they pointed out that immediately after the trial, a juror had spoken to a member of the press, which they found unacceptable. On December 1, 2017, they filed an appeal to the North Carolina Supreme Court, and in early 2021, they were successful. Thomas and Molly were released on $200 bail and left the Davidson County Jail within an hour of each other. Following their release, there was reasonable speculation about a potential settlement. However, the father and daughter maintained their innocence. Their retrial in October 2023, Thomas Martins and Molly Martins entered into a plea agreement for manslaughter after their guilty pleas. Davidson Superior Court Judge David Hall sentenced Molly and Thomas to between 51 and 74 months in prison. They have already served 44 months, and each person will only spend 7 months in prison for good behavior. Jack and Sarah are now young adults. Their aunt, Tracy, and uncle, David, adopted them and moved to Ireland. With Tracy's guidance, Sarah wrote a series of children's books aimed at helping children cope with the loneliness of losing a loved one. Going through their parents' divorce, Jack has become a singer-songwriter and is also a keen rugby player. Hello, everyone. Today, we will learn about another case. The case of millionaire Ben Novak Jr. In 2009, in New York, Ben Novak Jr. was found dead in a hotel room during a business trip. His hands and feet were bound with duct tape, and a gag was stuffed in his mouth. The 53-year-old died from choking on his own blood after an attack in his eye. Get ready. This story has many important details. First, let's learn about the Novak family. Ben Novak Sr. owned the renowned Fontainebleau Hotel, a 5-star establishment on the Miami coastline. Born in America in 1907, his father Hyman was a Russian immigrant with the original surname Novik. Hyman initially made clothes and later opened his own store, but it struggled financially. He then became a manager at a New York hotel, where he hired his son, Ben, who had a keen interest in the hotel industry, Ben's career flourished. And by age 40, he had become a successful hotelier with a solid income. He moved to Miami and changed the family name from Novick to Novak. Ben was married 3 times. His first wife, Elsie, was with him for about 15 years. They faced challenges in having children, and when they were both over 40, they adopted a boy named Ronald. Unfortunately, after just 2 years, they divorced. Elsie retained ownership of a prestigious hotel that was registered in her name during their marriage. After the divorce, Ben showed no interest in raising Ronald and did not participate in his life at all shortly after the divorce. When 45-year-old Ben Novak started a relationship with 30-year-old model Bernice a year later, in 1952, they formalized their relationship in December 1954. At the age of 47, Ben opened the famous Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami, which featured 500 rooms, 12 restaurants, a nightclub, and a luxurious swimming pool. The hotel became a popular vacation spot for current and former U.S. presidents. High-ranking officials and celebrities also performed there. Many films were filmed at this hotel. In 1956, the Novak family welcomed their long-awaited heir, a boy named Ben Novak Jr., who was affectionately called Benji. He grew up on the hotel grounds with his parents and was often surrounded by adults, including celebrities. Hotel security guards primarily took care of him. And from a young age, Benji dreamed of becoming a police officer. Benji was a spoiled child, often making cruel remarks. As he received everything he asked for from the nannies, his parents were usually busy with work. His father was always occupied with business, while his mother frequently worked at the hotel but tried to spend her free time with him. Ben Novak's second marriage ended in divorce, but he maintained a good relationship with his second wife. After they divorced, Benji continued to live with his father at the hotel. Ben Novak Sr. later remarried, but his third marriage was short-lived and also ended in divorce. Despite this, he continued to spend time with Bernice, and they remained close for the rest of their lives. In 1978, 24 years after the legendary hotel opened, Ben Novak declared bankruptcy due to the business's financial losses. However, he still had millions remaining in his accounts 7 years later. In 1985, he passed away from cardiopulmonary failure at the age of 78. In his will, he left his entire inheritance to Bernice and his only biological son, Ben Novak Jr. It is important to note that he left only $1 to his adopted son, Ronald, whom he had adopted with his first wife at the time of his father's death. Benji was 29 years old. He had previously worked in the police force but became disillusioned with that childhood dream and decided to start his own business. Those close to him noted that Benji transformed from a spoiled child into a bold and ambitious man, often displaying aggression when things didn't go his way. Much like his father, he explored various business ventures, experiencing both successes and failures. Ultimately, he established a company that organized conferences and conventions for other businesses, with Amway being his largest client for many years. In 1991, Benji lived in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, at 35. He had been in several relationships until meeting Narcy. Him realized he was truly in love. Narcy, who was from a large family in Cuba. She moved to the U.S. and worked as a dancer in a nightclub. Where she first met Benji, she already had a daughter, May Abad, from an old marriage, who was then raised by Bernice. Although Bernice wasn't fond of Narcy, she chose not to interfere. Wishing to avoid conflict with her son, Benji and Narcy married in 1991 and started living together. Narcy left her job as a stripper to help Benji with his business and to write books together. After their wedding, they enjoyed a lavish lifestyle, affording expensive clothes, dining out, and luxury cars. Additionally, Benji was an avid collector of Batman memorabilia, owning the second largest collection in the world, which included a 1,977 Batmobile. Among other items, he was meticulous about his purchases, always negotiating to get the best prices. In total, his collection was valued at around $2 million. It is worth noting that in a more business, Benji saved on everything. He organized conventions for large companies and made a point to cut costs wherever possible. This careful management allowed him to preserve his father's assets, which still contained a significant amount of money, around $10 million that he inherited. Benji frequently traveled for work, as he valued his freedom and did not like being tied down at home. Although he had no health issues, neither he nor Narcy wanted children. When Narcy's daughter grew up, she had 2 sons and began assisting her mother and stepfather with their business. May affectionately called Benji Dad and had a good relationship with him, receiving financial support from him as well. On July 10, 2009, Benji, Narcy, and May traveled from Florida to New York to organize a conference for the Amway Company, which would welcome thousands of participants from various cities. They stayed at the Hilton Hotel in Westchester County, Benji and Narcy in room 455, while May had her own room nearby. 2 days later, around 7 a.m., Narcy left their room to have breakfast in the cafe on the first floor. After a short time, about 40 minutes, she returned to their room. When she found her husband lying face down on the floor, there was a significant amount of blood around him. Benji was bound, and a gag was in his mouth, indicating he had been attacked. Panicked, Narcy called 911. Then she rushed down the corridor, crying out to another hotel guest that her husband had been killed. When the police and medical personnel arrived, they confirmed that Benji was dead. Initially, investigators believed he might have been the target of a robbery. After thoroughly inspecting the room, it was found that nearly all valuables were intact. Benji regularly carried large amounts of cash to conferences, and that money was untouched. The only item missing was a gold bracelet adorned with diamonds and engraved with his name. Investigative agency was revealed that a hotel employee called the Novak family's room at 6:54 a.m. At this time, Benji answered the phone and spoke with the employee about the upcoming conference. This shows he was still alive when Narcy left the room. Security camera footage showed Narcy moving around the hotel and supported her claim that she was having breakfast when her husband was attacked. Although Narcy was taken to the police station for questioning, she completely denied any wrongdoing and claimed she had no knowledge of what happened to Benji. She emphasized to investigators that Benji was a strict and tough person who often upset those around him. She explained that on the night in question, he had worked late into the night and went to bed only after sunrise. So she had breakfast on her own at 7:15 a.m. She went downstairs to the cafe, where she spoke with a hotel employee. The employee mentioned that they did not expect many attendees at the conference. As a result, many participants are forced to buy plastic plate because they fit the budget. After this conversation, Narcy tried to call Benji on his mobile phone to share this disappointing news, but he did not answer, thinking he was simply asleep. So Narcy did not feel concerned. Narcy went to the conference room to assess the situation. Afterward, she returned to her own room and sensed something was off, but Narcy chose to take a shower. Once she entered the bedroom, she discovered Benji dead and urgently called 911. The police and ambulance arrived at 7:57 a.m. Upon investigating, the police found no forced entry. The hotel room doors were secure. The keycard data revealed that Narcy had opened the door at midnight and again at 7:04 a.m. She could not remember exactly whether she closed the door behind her when she left in the morning or if she forgot to do it. Allowing someone to get inside without a key card during a lengthy 12-hour interrogation, Narcy acknowledged that she and Benji often engaged in bondage during sex and that he enjoyed it. This raised questions about why Benji was found in an unusual position. Narcy explained that on that morning, she had tied him up during their sexual activities and left, intending for him to wait and become more aroused. She also recounted an incident in which Benji had broken her nose and then sent her to a plastic surgeon to fix it when she woke up from the surgery. She discovered that silicone breast implants had also been inserted without her consent when asked if she had any role in her husband's death. Narcy firmly replied, "No," she added. "If you suspect me, then bring the electric chair. I'm ready to sit on it right now. I don't want to suffer. Let me do it right now." Investigators interviewing Narcy noted that her emotional responses appeared to lack sincerity. The following day, July 13, she failed a lie detector test but was released due to insufficient evidence shortly after. The autopsy results for Benji were revealed. It was confirmed that he had been attacked while sleeping. He sustained a blow to the head from a blunt object, was bound, and gagged. The attacker also his eyes, and Benji ultimately died from choking on his own blood. Next to Benji's body, police discovered a pair of cheap, fake glasses resembling a well-known brand. Narcy claimed the glasses were hers. They had broken, and she had given them to Benji for repair. Detectives found it odd that a wealthy woman would own such inexpensive fakes. Those close to Benji described Narcy as very jealous. On one occasion, Narcy caught her husband with another woman, leading her to erupt in jealousy and threatened to burn their house down. However, following Benji's death, she denied these claims, asserting that such incidents had never occurred. Detectives investigated Benji's banking transactions and discovered that he had been paying for an apartment in Florida for the past 2 years. Rebecca Bliss lived in this apartment. She had moved to America from Lebanon and previously worked in adult films. But after meeting Benji in 2007, she stopped doing dirty filming. Rebecca was Benji's mistress, and he covered all her expenses. He managed to keep this secret relationship hidden for a long time. However, just a few months before Benji's death, Narcy learned about the affair. She confronted Rebecca and offered make to her $10 to end the relationship with Benji and stay away from him. But Rebecca declined the offer. No one was certain if Benji intended to leave his wife, but it was clear that, if they divorced, Narcy would receive only $65 and relocation expenses according to their marriage contract. But now, Benji's multi-million-dollar fortune would ultimately be transferred to her. Investigative agency was revealed that 7 years earlier, in 2002, Benji had already been the victim of a home invasion. 2 unknown men broke into his home, tied him up, and held him hostage for an entire day without food or water. They stole valuables and cash totaling $400. Benji later told his friends that he believed Narcy orchestrated the attack instead of going to the police. He filed for divorce. Following this, Narcy began to spread harmful rumors about Benji's sexual preferences. In response, he retracted his divorce filing and continued to live with Narcy, insisting that he loved her deeply. During the investigation, detectives discovered that Bernice had sadly passed away just 3 months earlier, on April 4, 2009. At that time, she, 87-year-old, lived alone in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, as reported. After parking her car in the driveway, she got out and immediately tripped and fell, injuring her face and head. Once inside her home, she went to the bathroom to clean herself up, but fell several more times. She lay on the floor for 2 days without being able to call for help. Her body was found a week later. An autopsy revealed that Bernice had a broken jaw and teeth, along with skull injuries. Given her age and the circumstances, investigators concluded that her death was accidental. Relatives remembered Bernice as an active elderly woman who took care of herself. She called Benji every day and had a good relationship with May. Benji was deeply saddened by his mother's death and threw himself into work to distract himself from his grief. However, as time went on, he began to suspect that his mother's death was not an accident. After Benji's death, Narcy returned to her home in Florida, where May accused her of being responsible for her stepfather's death. This led to a major argument between Narcy and May, during which Narcy struck her daughter with a metal crowbar. Neighbors intervened to separate them and urged them to calm down. 10 days after, the police received an anonymous letter written in Spanish. The letter claimed that Narcy was involved in Benji's death and suggested investigating her brother, 57-year-old Cristobal Velas, who lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and worked as a bus driver. The police located Cristobal and questioned him, but he denied any involvement in Benji's death. Detectives gathered information about Cristobal and were immediately interested in the money transfers that he had made in the last month. Cristobal had sent money to a man named Alejandro Garcia, who had a criminal history and a noticeable physical characteristic. He had only one healthy eye. The other was damaged. He almost always wore glasses to hide the defect. The detectives started to suspect that Cristobal had paid Alejandro for the murder of Benji. The crime occurred at the Hilton Hotel, where there were numerous CCTV cameras. The detectives soon found video footage of Alejandro at the hotel. Accompanied by another man named Joel Gonzalez, the police began to monitor the locations and bank transactions of both men, and discovered that Alejandro and Joel had been living in South Florida for several months after Benji's death. Investigators were exploring the possibility that Narcy had Benji murdered because she feared he would leave her for his mistress, leaving her with nothing. After her husband's death, Narcy, still in New York, received $100 from his company as the main suspect in the case. She was not entitled to inherit his assets upon returning to Florida. Narcy began selling Benji's and Bernice's property. Keeping all the profits for herself, she sold many valuables, including part of a Batman toy collection. In August 2009, Narcy appeared at the bank with the keys to 3 safes in which Benji's valuables and papers were kept. She deceived the bank employees by saying that her husband would arrive in a few hours and give his consent, even though, at that time, 7 weeks had passed since Benji's death. Nobody knew what was inside. Before Narcy emptied the safes and left, Benji's body remained in the morgue for an extended period while the investigation continued. It was only 2 months after his death that he was finally buried in Queens County, New York, next to his father's grave. In November 2009, police summoned Alejandro and Joel for questioning. Initially, both men denied their involvement, but then they confessed. The investigators explained that Cristobal had found them and brought them to New York. At that time, Narcy was dining with Benji at the Hilton Hotel restaurant. While Alejandro and Joel sat at a nearby table, Narcy stroked Benji's hair and subtly signaled to the mercenaries who their target was. On the morning of July 12, while Benji was still asleep, Narcy invited Alejandro and Joel into their room. They assaulted the sleeping Benji with a baton, while Narcy directed their actions at her request. They even gouged out Benji's eyes. Cristobal then paid Alejandro thousands of dollars because carrying out the attack on the Novak family. Investigators found material evidence, including cheap glasses belonging to one of the mercenaries, which confirmed that Alejandro and Joel had been at the scene. In July 2010, a year after the crime, Narcy and Cristobal were arrested at the same time. The prosecutor's office reopened the investigation into the death of Bernice. This new investigation uncovered evidence that Bernice had also been murdered. A neighbor reported seeing 2 men in black clothing approaching Bernice's house and hiding behind the garage during a plea bargain. Alejandro confessed that he and Joel were responsible for attacking Bernice at Narcy's request. They used a gas wrench to beat Bernice, which led to her death. In April 2011, Narcy and Cristobal were charged with Bernice's murder as well. The primary motive for these contract killings was a multi-million-dollar inheritance. Narcy and Cristobal went on trial in 2012, where they both denied any involvement in the deaths of Benji and Bernice. During the trial, The investigation agency was revealed that Narcy had a secret phone at 6:39 a.m. on July 12, 2009. She used this phone to call Alejandro and Joel, inviting them to her room. They arrived at the correct floor and entered the room, which was not monitored by cameras after the murder took place. Narcy left the room casually, as if nothing had happened, and went to the first floor to establish an alibi. She had a meal at a cafe, conversed with a hotel employee, and then proceeded to a conference room in court when asked who, in her opinion, could have ordered the murder of Bernice and Benji. Narcy pointed her finger at her own daughter, May. Cristobal agreed with Narcy, stating that the idea belonged to May. The court also heard that after the arrest of Alejandro and Joel, a photograph of May was found in their pocket. May was to become the third victim. After the authorities discovered that May's life was in danger, she was asked to move to New York. It turned out that while still at large, Narcy hired a detective to collect dirt on May. The detective followed her and her sons, rummaged through their trash can, and collected personal belongings while living in New York. May quickly ran out of money. A local officer lent her $5,000 soon. May returned the money, but the officer lost his job because he was accused of paying May to give false testimony in court. Ultimately, Narcy and Cristobal were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, domestic violence, stalking, money laundering, and witness tampering. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Narcy is ineligible to claim her late husband's estate. Alejandro and Joel were also found guilty of contract killings of 2 people. They were sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole 30 years later. Other participants in this high-profile case were also found. Dennis Ramirez, the son-in-law of Cristobal, pleaded guilty to the fact that on July 12, he drove Alejandro and Joel to the Hilton Hotel after the crime. Dennis admitted their involvement in the crime and received a less severe punishment. One of the key pieces of evidence that helped bring the case to a close was an anonymous letter in Spanish that was submitted to police 10 days after the murder, written by both Narcy's sister and Cristobal, who lived in Florida. She confirmed that it was at Narcy's request that Bernice was killed. Then Benji, and the next victim was supposed to be May, while Benji was still alive. He left his will inheritance to Narcy, and in her will, she persuaded to Benji include May there. After Narcy's conviction, May became the sole heir to her stepfather's multi-million-dollar fortune. But the story does not end there. Whenever it comes to a large inheritance, everything is decided quite a long time and is calculated in decades. The fortune of May was really large. 2 houses in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where Benji and Bernice lived, 9 expensive cars, and also the Batmobile, a white yacht, Lightning, and a bunk barge, large bank accounts, with life insurance payouts for Benji and Bernice. Over the years of litigation, there have been people claiming to be Benji's, and they have tried to claim the inheritance. Benji's first adopted son, Ronald, who hit rock bottom in the 2000s and even lived in the woods, suffered from mental disorders. His mother, Elsie, died in 2001, leaving her adopted son a fairly large inheritance. However, Ronald was nowhere to be found. They couldn't find him and reported him missing in 2008, just 2 days before he was declared dead. Ronald suddenly showed up and took over his adoptive mother Elsie's inheritance due to mental health issues. Ronald's money was put into a trust. Ronald was paid $400 a week and also had all his medical care paid for a year after Benji died. Ronald started fighting over his inheritance. He had enough money to hire a good lawyer and tried to sue for the property of Benji. Ronald tried to prove that May was included in Novak's will under pressure from Narcy. He attempted to deprive May of the right to inherit her stepfather, but he failed. For a decade, May Abad fought for her stepfather's money once. She needed a fairly large sum of money for her son's operation. The boy had heart problems. Then May received $50,000 from Novak's assets. Eventually, May, together with her sons, became the full heirs of the Novak family fortune. However, over the years of litigation, the total amount of the inheritance has significantly decreased. The case of Ben Novak Jr. not only exposes the greed and cold calculation of a wealthy family, but also highlights the human nature when caught up in the whirlwind of money and power. Through the involvement of Narchi, her brother Cristobal, the case proves that the most brutal acts sometimes come from those closest. The consequences include not only life sentences for the conspirators, but also the complete collapse of a family empire that was once seen as a symbol of success. The case leaves a profound reminder of the dangers of greed, betrayal, and bad choices, and becomes one of the most haunting crime stories in American history. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Sandra Garner. Sandra and John met in the 1990s in the small town of Paris, Texas, which has a population of around 20,000. They worked together at a packaging company and quickly formed a close relationship, which developed into a romantic relationship. Sandra is 13 years older than John and has been through a divorce. She has 2 children from that marriage, Wes and Andrea. Although they appeared happy, their relationship faced many difficulties from the beginning. After dating for 2 years, they decided to get married. John became stepfather to Sandra's children, Wes and Andrea, and is also a husband who deeply loves his wife. They were married on January 1, 2000, in Las Vegas. John appears to be a friendly and sociable person, well liked by most people. However, those who knew him closely were aware of his struggles with alcohol. When he drank, he sometimes lost control and became aggressive. Additionally, he dealt with mental health issues and was on antidepressants. John worked as the HR manager, responsible for hiring and firing employees. He especially enjoys firing people, which leads many to think that he enjoys the power he has over others. Overall, John was a caring person who loved his family. After the wedding, his life seemed to get better, thanks to the sincere love between him and his wife, Sandra. They felt very compatible and quickly got along with their children, especially little Wes. However, Andrea did not like John, her stepfather. This is a normal psychological reaction of most children when they do not want to accept their parents' new partner, and it usually requires time to adapt. In 2014, Sandra started experiencing health issues and was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, which greatly complicated her daily life. This has changed their family life a lot. John had to do the housework and take care of Sandra. During this time, she tried to work remotely to help out financially. He willingly supported her, helping her with daily tasks and providing emotional support. As a result, Andrea witnessed the love between her parents and began to empathize with John. The relationship between Andrea and John improved. She started helping John with more housework and taking care of Sandra. This brought their family closer. Unfortunately, Sandra's health continued to decline. She faced ongoing struggles with her illness, impacting both her physical and emotional well-being. The medication she took provided only partial relief, alleviating some symptoms but leaving her feeling emotionally suppressed. At times, she found herself searching online for ways to end her life, feeling overwhelmed by depression. During those times, she confided in John about her thoughts and expressed her worries about being a burden to him. John reassured her, saying that if she were to die, he would not want to continue living either. This conversation made Sandra realize that she could not leave her children without a parent. In that moment, John became her reason for living. As Sandra's health deteriorated, she decided to leave her job because she was unable to work, either in the office or from home. This meant that John was the only one earning money to support the family, causing further financial hardship. Even so, John showed no signs that he was stressed. He always supported his wife and children, was always by their side, and tried his best to help. In 2016, The family moved to a small town called Mai Sang, about 50 kilometers south of Taoist in Alice County. With a population of less than 1,000, Mai Sang is a friendly and cozy community. They loved it so much that they decided to buy a house there. John and Sandra have good relationships with both families. This was proven when John's relatives moved into a new house right across from theirs. They frequently organized joint events and celebrated holidays together. The backyard of John and Sandra's house became a gathering place for everyone. By this time, their children, Wes and Andrea, had moved out and were living independently. Sandra continued to battle her illness, but the family seemed to be doing fine, at least until 2018. On January 1st, they were set to celebrate their 18th wedding anniversary. They planned to have dinner at a restaurant and invited Sandra's son, Wes, to join them, while Andrea was away on a trip and could not attend. Wes arrived for the celebration and left around 7 p.m. Typically, Sandra and John went to bed early, around 9 or 10 o'clock, and that night was no exception. However, a terrible tragedy struck later that night. At around 1 o'clock in the morning, the 911 operator received a call from Sandra. She said she needed help and asked for both the police and an ambulance, as her husband John had been attacked. According to her, an intruder had entered their home, attacked her husband, and then forced her into the bathroom. There, the assailant ordered her to count to 100, threatening to kill her if she did not obey. She complied with his demands. Sandra told the dispatcher that her husband John was wheezing and likely still alive, and she requested help. The dispatcher provided instructions for performing artificial respiration, and she followed. Fishers were dispatched immediately, but it took them about 15 minutes to arrive. When they entered the house, they heard Sandra calling for help from the bedroom. There, on the floor, lay her husband, whom she had pulled from the bed to administer artificial respiration. One of the officers checked John's body. He was still warm, but showed no signs of life. It seemed he was still alive when Sandra called asking for help. Unfortunately, John did not survive until the authorities arrived. The medical team confirmed that he was dead. The officers then suspected that the attacker might still be in the house, so they conducted a thorough search but found no one else present. The killer had already escaped. Meanwhile, Sandra was in shock and began to have a hysterical reaction to the situation. As a result, she was unable to communicate with the police initially and required assistance. Medical personnel had to help calm her down, while detectives and forensic experts arrived to carefully examine the crime scene and collect evidence. Around 2 a.m., Sandra regained consciousness and was taken to the police station for questioning. The police checked to see if her hands were stained with gunpowder and determined whether she was the person who attacked John or not. Forensic experts photographed the crime scene, collected the clothes she wore before the police arrived, and interviewed an important witness who could describe the attacker. The police hoped she could provide useful information to the detectives. However, her illness made it hard for her to focus. Even so, she made an effort to assist with the investigation. Sandra explained that she and John had gone to bed together before the attack occurred. Everything happened so quickly that she didn't fully comprehend what was happening or see the attacker clearly. She was overwhelmed with fear. She recalled being awakened by a gunshot around 12:45 a.m., followed by a second shot. In the bedroom, she saw a man with a flashlight and a gun jump from the bed to the floor. She hid and screamed, hoping someone would hear her and come to help. The intruder was wearing a blue sweatshirt and jeans, a mask, and was much taller than she was. Sandra pleaded with her attacker not to kill her. He responded that he was there to take revenge on John and meant her no harm. He explained that he had been working hard at the company where John worked, but he was fired several years ago, which led to him losing his home and ruining his life. This grudge against John was the reason for his actions. then demanded to see the safe. Sandra led him to the closet, where the reflections from the metal door allowed her to get a better look at him. She tried to get a better look at him, but he threatened to kill her if she did so. Fearful, she turned away and stopped trying to look at him. Then, he opened the safe and handed over the money, which she estimated to be around $18,000. She couldn't provide an exact figure since it had been a long time since she last counted it, but she was confident that it was $18,000. The police had no way to verify this, so they had to take her word. After taking the money, the attacker ordered her to go to the bathroom and count to 100. The interrogation lasted several hours, after which the police allowed Sandra to return home. By then, her family had gathered to support her during this difficult time. She needed them now, more than ever. She was deeply saddened by what had happened. However, some family members doubted her sincerity. Many people noticed her strange behavior immediately after she spoke to the police. She returned to her house, even though the attacker might return, as if she was not worried about the incident. In fact, Sandra seemed to be hoping the man would come back so she could attack him. Meanwhile, her family arrived at her son Wes's house and informed him that John had been killed. He was shocked and immediately went to the police station to report the incident. What was strange was that he did this before going to visit his mother. He did not even call her to ask about the situation. Later, the police understood Wes's actions. He had something important to share with them. From the very first sentence, he confirmed to the police that he believed the murder was committed by his own mother, Sandra. However, he felt very embarrassed to say this because it was difficult to give testimony against the closest relative. He was skeptical that an intruder could have entered their home unnoticed, even though his parents had 2 dogs. These dogs should have barked to warn of danger. His statements puzzled the police. During the initial interrogation, Sandra's testimony was so clear and convincing that the police had no doubts about her. However, Wes maintained that his mother could have killed John, prompting the police to consider this possibility. Police thoroughly searched the entire crime scene, including the main house and several outbuildings like a garage and a barn. In the garage, they discovered Sandra's Ford Mustang. They were looking for her self-defense pistol, which Wes mentioned was usually kept in her purse but is sometimes hidden under the seat of the vehicle. Unfortunately, they could not locate the weapon. In the house, police discovered a total of 49 pistols and 10 rifles. All of these weapons belonged to John, a gun enthusiast who did not know how to store them safely. These weapons are kept all over the house, suggesting that John wanted a gun to be ready for use in emergency situations. This indicated that he might have feared an attack from enemies. However, one notable weapon was missing from his collection: a Taurus .38 revolver registered to Sandra. It is possible that the revolver was lost, stolen, or misplaced. Additionally, a small amount of gunpowder residue was found on her hand, which could have come from accidental circumstances, such as being near her husband John when he was killed. Besides, during cardiopulmonary resuscitation, Sandra touched her husband. The amount of gunpowder residue on her hands was minimal, suggesting she might have come into contact with it after the murder. Initially, she may have had more gunpowder traces, but they may have been deleted during the move. Although this evidence was circumstantial, it was quite suspicious, leading to her becoming a suspect in her husband's murder. During the investigation, police decided to examine Sandra and John's tablets and mobile phones. These devices were confiscated to analyze their messages and internet searches. Investigators discovered that Sandra was conducting very suspicious searches, including searching for fentanyl and other powerful drugs. Even more troubling, shortly before John's death, she had searched for methods to kill someone and ways to conceal a crime. However, these searches are not enough to definitely confirm her malicious intentions, as they are mixed with normal searches. Still, they raise suspicion. On January 4, 2018, police investigated the possibility that Sandra was involved in John's murder. The only issue was that they had yet to locate her gun. Officers consulted her son, Wes. He suggested that if he were searching for the gun, he would check his mother's car. Consequently, police decided to conduct a more thorough search of the car and garage. When the detectives arrived at Sandra's house, they found that the garage was locked. They asked Wes to open the door for them, and he went to see his mother. He had asked her to give him a spare key so the police could get into the garage. However, she was visibly terrified. She insisted that she would not let the officers in, demanding that they leave immediately. All those who witnessed this gesture were shocked. Her reaction left them feeling strange. Previously, she had communicated openly with the police and was willing to help in the investigation. However, on that day, she had a very strong reaction. Initially, Sandra expressed disappointment with her relatives because they suspected her of guilt. Afterward, she left the house and went to her garage in an attempt to stop the officers from searching. However, her efforts were in vain. The police informed her that they would conduct a search, even if she did not want it. If she refused to provide the key, they would break down the door, since they had a warrant. Consequently, she had no choice but to comply and unlock the garage. When they got in, they immediately checked under the driver's seat of the Mustang. There they found a grocery bag containing a paper towel that wrapped a rusty .38 caliber revolver. This suggests that during the initial search, the weapon was hidden elsewhere, and she later returned it to its usual location. This is absolutely certain because the police team that conducted the previous search was present at the scene again. Sandra was likely very nervous and reluctant to let the police into the garage. The investigators questioned Wes again, and he claimed to have seen Sandra put the murder weapon in her car after the police had left. However, she denied this accusation. It was puzzling because she had no motive to kill her beloved husband, who had always cared for her. The detectives decided to question Sandra again, not just as a witness, but as a suspect in her husband's brutal murder. They made it clear they suspected her of the crime. They pressured her, accusing her of lying and trying to obstruct the investigation. Although she was visibly upset and denied any involvement in the crime, her emotional response seemed sincere. She confirmed that there were no weapons hidden in her car. She was emotional at the time and could not provide any further information. Experts analyzed the flight path of the bullet from the gun used in the case. They determined that the shots were fired from the revolver found in the car, and the bullets collected matched this weapon. However, no fingerprints or DNA from Sandra were found on the revolver, indicating that it could have been used by anyone. Despite this, she could still be arrested and charged, but it would take more evidence to build a full case. The police went to arrest Sandra at her home, but she was not there, so they waited for her to return. When she drove up in her car, she was surprised to find herself immediately arrested. John's family watched from the windows of a nearby house. As the police handcuffed the family members of John erupted in applause. They feel grateful that justice was finally served and believe that she was the one who shot John. Sandra was taken into custody and her bail was set at $2 million, an amount she could not afford. As a result, she remained in prison for a long time. On March 21, 2018, Sandra Garner was officially charged with the murder of her husband, John. She spent a year and a half in prison, which took a severe toll on her health. When she appeared in court in September 2019 in Waxahachie, Texas, she looked very unwell. It seemed that the situation had drained her of her remaining energy. She appeared physically worn out and emotionally exhausted. From the outset, the prosecutor's office believed they had strong reasons and sufficient evidence to convict her. However, as the prosecution's case progressed, it became increasingly clear that Sandra might avoid punishment, as the evidence against her was largely circumstantial. One of the key witnesses in this case is Sandra's son, Wes. He actively sought to push the investigation forward, even implicating his own mother. Wes confidently claimed that the weapon should be in the car, despite the fact that investigators found it was not there previously. Typically, someone who shares such detailed information about a crime raises suspicions of their involvement. This led many to wonder, did Wes want John, his stepfather, dead? Did he orchestrate the incident to have Sandra, his sick mother, arrested instead of facing consequences himself? When investigators looked closely at Wes, they discovered several troubling issues. He was able to kill John because he had access to the entire house and knew where the gun was hidden. Investigators discovered that the suspicious online searches only occurred on nights when Wes visited his parents, John and Sandra, after they had gone to bed. Tablet searches can be traced back to Wes in the first place. He seemed determined to make his mother, Sandra, pay for this crime, and even implied that she had a weapon. Wes's alibi was highly questionable. He claimed that he was at home watching videos on his laptop at the time of the crime, but no one could verify this. He lived alone. And during the initial investigation, the police overlooked a crucial detail. His laptop was set to a different time zone. Additionally, Wes can set the video to play continuously while he is absent, meaning he had no real alibi. Furthermore, John had a motive, as he was named in John's will, and might have wanted to access his inheritance quickly. In contrast, Sandra had no reason to want John dead. John was a significant part of her life and had cared for her during her illness for many years. He is the only one who earns money to support the family, and they live in harmony and attached together. During the trial, it was highlighted that the police had failed to act professionally. It took them 15 minutes to get to the crime scene. The police who conducted the investigation that night were inexperienced, as they had never been involved in a criminal investigation before. This led to some serious mistakes. In addition, the police needed to use special bags to preserve traces of gunpowder on Sandra's hands, but they did not do so. Photos taken at the crime scene on a police officer's mobile phone were later accidentally deleted and could not be recovered. The officers also did not conduct thorough interrogations of former employees at John's workplace, although Sandra said that the killer was fired from John's company, and from then on, he developed hatred towards John. The police only conducted interviews with a few witnesses, and they prioritized questioning John's family. Consequently, the prosecutor had to address the defense's claims about the police's lack of competence. There have been numerous investigations into police misconduct, and those found to be at fault were disciplined. The prosecutor needed to clarify why the police did not collect fingerprints from the door handle of the Mustang where the revolver was discovered. Forensic experts might have found a fingerprint belonging to another suspect, the person who hid the weapon. If that person was really Wes, he could have entered the house without making the dog bark because they recognized him. However, there were uncertainties. Sandra cannot recognize her son Wes's eyes or voice. She said she felt very scared at the time, and due to her illness, it was difficult for her to concentrate. As a result, she overlooked many details and did not fully understand who she was speaking to, and Wes could have altered his voice during their conversation. During the trial, Sandra asserted that her son, Wes, was responsible for the murder of her husband, John. She noted that all evidence pointed to Wes, and he even hid her gun and tried to arrange everything to blame her. Recently, she had observed his suspicious behavior and noted that he had become distant from John, with whom they had previously been friendly. To verify her claims, a cross-examination was conducted. This process can help prove innocence, but it carries risks. Even small mistakes in her answers can sway the jury against them. She has difficulty during this interrogation process, providing inconsistent answers and leaving many gaps in her story. She believes the cause was confusion and health issues, which may have left the jury unconvinced. The prosecution presented over 400 pieces of evidence and interviewed 25 witnesses, leading them to believe that Sandra would be found guilty of her husband's murder, John. However, when it was the defense's turn, they successfully refuted the prosecution's arguments and pointed out the negligence in the investigation process. They point out that initially, Wes was not considered a suspect. There was no testing for gunpowder residue on his hands, no polygraph examination, and no thorough investigation of his alibi. When the jury began deliberating, many thought it would be a long one. However, they returned a verdict after just a few hours. In the late afternoon, when the court announced the verdict, all of Sandra's family gathered in the courtroom to hear the decision. The jury found her innocent, bringing her immense relief. Overcome with emotion, she cried and embraced her lawyers. After serving 21 months in prison, she was finally free to go home. However, this news upset her son, Wes, and John's family. They believed that she was responsible for John's death and expected her to be sentenced to prison. The relationship between John's family and Sandra's family became strained, and this eventually forced his family to move away. Now, Sandra believes that Wes was the one who killed John. Sandra's relationship with her son, Wes, has deteriorated greatly. After the trial, they completely stopped communicating. Sandra's daughter, Andrea, continues to support she and believes in her innocence. The police have not closed the case, and for a while, they focused on Wes as the main suspect in the murder. However, valuable time has been lost. Many clues were lost, and many things were not done in time. As a result, it is now nearly impossible to definitively prove anyone's guilt. Evidence related to this case has been stored for years, and no one has taken the initiative to investigate further. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Alexis Rasmussen. Alexis Rasmussen was born in 1995 and grew up in North Ogden, Utah, a small town known for its quiet and not far from Salt Lake City. She loved dancing, reading, and spending time with her family, especially with her brother, who was her best friend. They enjoyed watching movies and chatting together for hours. Alexis was cheerful, sociable, and always smiling. She wanted to be independent and earn her own money for personal expenses. Like many teens, she decided to work as a nanny to earn some extra cash. In the spring of 2011, Alexis started searching for a part-time nanny job. She learned of a couple nearby looking for childcare help. She applied and was hired immediately after the interview. The couple, DEA and Eric Millerberg, were 38 and 36 years old, respectively. They were seen as decent and educated, attending church every Sunday. DEA worked at the hospital, and they had 2 daughters. Alexis's meeting with them went well, and they quickly built a good rapport. She started working almost daily, caring for their children while they was at work. The eldest daughter, from DEA's previous marriage, was 5 years old, and the youngest was just 9 months old. Everyone was happy. Alexis had pocket money, which she spent as she wished and even managed to save some. Eric and DEA were finally able to go to work normally and spend time together, appreciating that their children were always supervised by a young nanny. Meanwhile, Alexis's parents were pleased that their daughter was earning her own money and showing a desire to work, rather than spending time at questionable parties. Many of her friends also worked as nannies or waitresses, so this was considered normal. This thing was ideal for everyone until a tragedy occurred. On September 10, 2011, as usual, Alexis went to babysit the Millerberg family's 2 children during the day. She was supposed to return home in the evening. However, at 11:30 p.m., she called her mother, Dawn, saying that Eric and DEA had not returned from their date yet, and she would have to stay late. She asked if she could stay the night to avoid having to go home after dark. Her parents agreed, they trusting the Millerbergs as a decent family and they think nothing bad will happen. This was the last call her mother received from her daughter. In fact, Alexis' relationship with the Millerberg family was complicated. When she met Day, she quickly fell under their negative influence. Despite their respectable appearance, but they had a troubled past. Both had been convicted for distributing illegal substances, and Eric had committed other crimes. At the time of these incidents, both were on probation for another offense, but neither Alexis nor her parents were aware of this, nor did they suspect she might be in danger at their house. The Millerbergs gradually got Alexis addicted to alcohol, starting with small amounts before hosting parties where alcohol was abundant. Later, they introduced her to weed. She quickly became dependent, and soon they began paying Alexis for her childcare work not with money but with weed. From the outside, no one noticed anything wrong with Alexis. She took very little and returned home late, so her parents were unaware of her new addictions and believed she was in good hands. Unfortunately, this was not the case. On September 11, 2011, Alexis' parents were waiting for their daughter to come home. However, after she informed them the previous day that she would stay at Millerberg's house overnight, she never returned home. Her parents tried calling her, but their calls went straight to voicemail. Too worried for her daughter, her mother, Dawn, contacted all of her friends, but none of them had any information. Dawn has also been in contact with the Millerberg family, who said that she had left their home that morning and they never saw her again. Then, Dawn reported her disappearance to the police, who promptly began their investigation. Police have issued a missing persons notice for Alexis and questioned Eric and DEA, as they were the last known individuals to see Alexis. When the police arrived at the Millerberg home, Eric and DEA refused to let them inside, saying the house was untidy. They talked to the officers outside, stating that Alexis left their home around 11:30 a.m. to meet a friend, and afterward, the family went to bed and claimed to know nothing more about her whereabouts. During questioning, the officers noticed that DEA and Eric appeared to be under the influence of stimulants, which might have explained their erratic movements and overly cheerful speech. Their behavior seemed suspicious to the investigators, but without a search warrant, they were unable to inspect the house. This made them even more suspicious. The detectives speculated about whom Alexis might have planned to meet. They were aware of her boyfriend and considered that she might have gone to see him. The police came to see her boyfriend, and he said they had no plans to meet that morning. To verify this, he showed his phone and his messages with Alexis. Upon inspection, it was clear they had only exchanged brief messages shortly before she stopped communicating. The boyfriend claimed he had no idea where she could have gone or whom she was with. Detectives also spoke with Alexis' other friends and classmates, but nobody had seen her since she disappeared. It seemed like she had vanished. They all mentioned that she had no enemies. She was an ordinary teenager, with no ties to the criminal world. The possibility of her running away was dismissed because all her belongings, including money she had saved, were left at home. She had never run away before and wasn't seen as a troubled teenager. All the leads turned out to be useless. At that time, Alexis' parents were unaware of an app called Blink, which could have helped them locate she. Blink allows real-time tracking of the movements of loved ones and friends who choose to share their location. The app is designed to be secure and does not allow tracking of strangers, which prevents stalking. To track someone, you must send a request from your contact list, and they must accept it. The last time Alexis's phone worked was at Eric's house, which was the last known location of she. There was no evidence that she had left the house Millerberg that morning. Investigators started looking into Eric and DEA more closely and discovered that they had a history of distributing illegal substances, and Eric has a lot of criminal records. During the investigation, police learned that Alexis's friends knew about the true nature of the relationship between Alexis and the Millerberg family. Alexis, along with several other teenagers, including friends who had also disappeared, looked after their children. The teenagers were pleased with these working conditions because it gave them access to alcohol and substances. Multiple witnesses confirmed that DEA sold prescription drugs to Alexis, for which she received about $100. Detectives continue to question Eric and DEA, informing that they knew about illegal drug activities. Then, Eric and DEA admitted to giving drugs to teenagers, but denied any involvement in Alexis's disappearance. Despite their denial, they were arrested for distributing illegal substances and violating probation terms. They faced up to 5 years in prison. The case was further complicated because they were supplying drugs to minors. The police also reached out to Eric and DEA's friends and acquaintances for information, but everyone refused to cooperate. By this time, detectives were convinced that Eric and DEA were responsible for Alexis's disappearance. Detectives have obtained a search warrant for the Millerberg family home and conducted a search. Although they didn't find anything suspicious, they did discover a large quantity of illegal substances. Their 2 children, the eldest daughter was placed with her biological father, while the youngest child went to a foster family. A month into the investigation, a confidential informant contacted the officers by phone. He revealed that on the night of the disappearance, Alexis stayed at the Millerberg family house. She didn't leave or meet anyone the next morning. That night, Eric offered her strong substances, and she agreed to try them. Afterward, she started acting crazy and not understanding what she was doing. Eric persuaded her to engage in intimate relations. During the incident, Eric and DEA noticed that the girl was extremely disoriented and had an unusually low body temperature. DEA, who had medical training, realized she needed urgent assistance. They carried her to the bathroom and placed her in hot water to warm her up. Then, she regained consciousness and seemed to improve. She asked to be left alone to relax. Eric and DEA left the house to smoke and think about their next steps, as they were very frightened by Alexis's condition. When they returned, they noticed she was still cold. They then took her out of the water, wrapped her in a warm blanket, and placed her on the bed. They went out again for another smoke break to discuss the situation. Upon returning, they found she unconscious, with a mucus-like substance coming from her mouth. DEA, being a nurse, attempted to resuscitate her using all her skills, but it was too late, she had already died. Eric and DEA were scared, as they were on conditional early release and were on house arrest, and they did not want to go back to prison. In their panic, they sought help from friends to dispose of the body. They needed a car, which they didn't have, but everyone refused to assist, not wanting to risk jail for aiding and abetting. Desperate, they contacted another friend to borrow a car. He agreed, and they placed Alexis's body in the trunk and drove to another county. There, in a remote forest area, they hid her body. The confidential informant, Smith, reported everything to the police. Initially unaware of what was going on, he lent his car and later helped Eric and DEA move the decomposing body to a remote location. During this time, he heard all the information he shared with the police. Feeling remorse for assisting he decided to disclose everything to the investigators, who needed this information. Thanks to his tip, the police discovered the body of Alexis on October 18, 2011, 38 days after she disappeared. The victim was found in a fetal position, with her legs pulled close to her body, partially concealed in a garbage bag. Due to the body's advanced decomposition, the police could not immediately identify her. The body was in a shallow grave. A detailed forensic examination was required to confirm her identity, determine the cause of death, and the circumstances surrounding the incident. The identity of the girl, Alexis Rasmussen, was confirmed through dental records and fingerprints, exactly as predicted. Autopsy results and post-mortem analysis showed that Alexis had 7 times the lethal dose of a potent toxin in her body, which may have been the cause of death. However, there were also signs of strangulation, blunt force trauma, and stab wounds on her body. Due to the body's poor condition and advanced decomposition, it was difficult to identify all the wounds accurately, making it impossible to determine the exact cause of death. As a result, an overdose was concluded as the cause of death, but it was clear that this was not an accident. The girl had been abused. Alexis' family requested privacy during the investigation because she was a minor. A memorial service was held in her hometown of Ogden, attended by many residents. The teenager was buried on October 29th. Informant Smith was promised immunity from charges of complicity in exchange for his cooperation. His testimony was crucial in locating the body, gathering evidence, and bringing charges, so he appeared in court only as a witness. During the trial preparation, phone records from Eric's mobile phone were reviewed. On the night Alexis disappeared, he called his friend several times, asking for help to dispose of something. CCTV footage was also examined, revealing that on September 10, 2011, between 10 and 11 p.m., DEA visited the Wall Prince Pharmacy to buy prescription drugs that induce an altered state of consciousness. Police conducted a detailed search of the Millerbird family home using luminol and found tiny blood stains. It was clear they had tried to hide what had happened by thoroughly cleaning. However, luminol can detect blood stains even after cleaning agents are used, which the criminals apparently did not know. A section of the old carpet had been cut out and discarded, leading the police to believe it had blood on it that couldn't be cleaned off. The police were puzzled about the presence of blood in the house since, according to Smith, there shouldn't have been any after an overdose. This suggested that something more violent had occurred and that Alexis likely suffered violence. Detectives then obtained a search warrant for Smith's car, which had been used to transport she. However, the car had already been sold to another district, delaying its seizure. When the car was finally located and examined, it was found that the old trunk upholstery had been removed and discarded, but microscopic blood traces remained underneath. All DNA samples collected were tested and confirmed to belong to Alexis. Smith told detectives that the incident might have been a deliberate murder. Eric and DEA may have sought to eliminate Alexis to prevent her from reporting them to the police for drug distribution and harassment. The police supported this theory, as there were indications of a premeditated crime. Initially, Eric faced charges of child abuse and drug distribution, while DEA was only charged with forging a prescription for medical drugs. After new evidence surfaced, Eric was additionally charged with first-degree murder, attempting to obstruct justice, and engaging in sexual activities with a minor. A forensic examination later revealed that Alexis' body was abused post-mortem, which constituted a criminal offense under state law. Eric and DEA was decided to be tried separately, and DEA's trial began in April 2012. She was accused of illegally obtaining a prescription for illegal substances and obstructing justice. In 2015, she was sentenced to 7 years in prison. However, by then, she had already served 3 years during the trial. She was to be sent to prison to complete her sentence. She was extremely outraged by the jury's decision. Then, she gave a heartfelt speech, expressing regret for what happened, but she did not admit guilt or involvement in Alexis' death, claiming her husband, Barrick, was responsible. She offered excuses and also expressed her deepest condolences to the Alexis family. The court deemed imprisonment appropriate for Eric and DEA's actions, distributing substances to minors, engaging in sexual intercourse, and intentionally drugging a teenager with illegal substances. Additionally, they attempted to hide the body and mislead the investigation. Notably, the body was buried twice because Eric thought the first location was not secure enough. This indicated careful planning of the crimes. DEA stated that after 3 years in prison, she realized her mistakes and wanted to reintegrate into society. She requested freedom, but no one believed her intentions were genuine. Her actions were seen as an effort to avoid more jail time, so the commission decided she should remain imprisoned. DEA was sent back to jail to serve the rest of her sentence. However, she soon became eligible for parole. While in prison, her relationship with Eric fell apart. They argued, and DEA filed for divorce, which was finalized. During his imprisonment, Eric changed the tattoo on his neck from DEA's name to Death, which was in English. This change led to disciplinary action against him. In July 2013, Eric Millerbird's trial began. By March 2014, he pleaded not guilty to all charges. He claimed that the night Alexis disappeared, she stayed with them to babysit. After returning from a date, they used substances together at her request. They all attempted to engage in sexual activity. Regarding the drug use, Eric asserted that Alexis used the substances voluntarily. During the trial, Eric's criminal history was revealed. Between 1997 and 2011, he faced multiple charges, including burglary, firearm offenses, and resisting arrest. During the trial, the front rows of the courtroom were filled with Alexis' friends and acquaintances, all visibly grieving. This hearing was particularly challenging for them as it revealed sensitive details about the life of the underage girl for the first time. Previously, her relatives were unaware that she was paid in substances by her employers for her work as a nanny. These adults had gotten her addicted. However, Eric showed no remorse for exploiting the girl. He remained jailed during the trial for providing illegal substances to minors and harassing them. This situation likely led to conflicts for Eric in prison. He was attacked by his cellmate, Simon Russell, who stabbed him around 30 times, focusing on his head and neck. He also suffered multiple defensive wounds on his hands. He was then taken to the hospital, where his condition was deemed satisfactory after receiving first aid. He survived the attack. The day after, Simon was charged with attempted murder and obstruction of justice. Eric's provocative behavior was seen as outright disrespect both in jail and in the courtroom. He not only supplied Alexis, a 16-year-old girl, with marijuana but also repeatedly attempted to have sexual relations with her. On the night of the girl's death, he assaulted her even after she had died. Eric's wife, DEA, testified against him, accusing him of committing the crime. She stated that he forced Alexis to take 3 doses of drugs and then started to harass her. When Alexis became ill, they attempted to help her, but it was too late, and she died. Despite this, Eric still engaged in sexual intercourse with her after her death. The prosecution supported this account. The prosecutor argued that Eric behaved monstrously, exploiting Alexis's trust, coercing her into consuming hard drugs, and then assaulting her by stabbing and bludgeoning her. They claimed his sexual desire was the main motive for the murder. However, Eric's lawyer contended that DEA's testimony was false, accusing her of manipulating the situation to avoid punishment and by shifting blame onto her husband. Actually, the prosecution only presented communication records from Alexis' accounts, with no evidence from DEA that Eric had given her a lethal dosage of illegal drugs. The medical examiner's report stated that the official cause of death was an overdose, despite other injuries sustained. There was no definitive proof that Alexis didn't inject the drugs herself, only witness testimonies could clarify any involvement in her drug use. However, Eric and DEA blamed each other. The defense argued that DEA's involvement in the crime was greater than she admitted and that she was equally guilty. They alleged that she urged Eric to kill Alexis and dispose of the body. The lawyers claimed Alexis's death was accidental due to an overdose. Furthermore, the defense lawyers suggested that DEA should bear significant responsibility for the incident. The prosecution argued that Eric supplied Alexis with illegal substances to harm her. She deceased also had other injuries, including head trauma from a blunt object and some fresh wounds, indicating it wasn't an accident. According to the prosecution, it was clearly murder, with Eric directly responsible for her death. They demanded the harshest possible punishment for Eric, describing him as a manipulator who first got the girl addicted to mild illegal substances and then continued to administer them for his exploitation. The trial was highly controversial, with an uncertain outcome until sentencing. Eric advised his lawyers to agree to let him take some responsibility. He believed it was only fair to admit his role in what happened and apologize to Alexis' family, hoping to receive a lighter sentence. However, he denied committing deliberate murder. He claimed he did not inject she with psychoactive substances, attributing this action to DEA. Surveillance footage showed that DEA went to the pharmacy for prescription drugs and forged prescriptions. Despite this evidence, Alexis' relatives believed Eric was the main culprit and urged the judge to impose the maximum sentence. They wanted a life sentence without parole to ensure he would never be released. The court found him guilty of all charges, including first-degree murder, and sentenced him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 6 years. DEA applied for parole 3 times. Her first applications in 2015 and 2017 were rejected. However, in 2018, her application was approved because she completed addiction recovery courses and a culinary business program to help her reintegrate into society. She was released on October 16, 2018. Eric became eligible for parole in 2018 and applied for release, but his request was denied, and he remains in prison. Alexis' family hopes he will never be released. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Catherine Gowing. Catherine Gowing was a 37-year-old veterinarian from Ireland who had a passion for traveling and nature. One of her favorite places was the outskirts of Wales in the UK. Mold, a small town in North Wales with a population of around 10,000, is known for its restaurants, pubs, markets, and shops. It was in this town that Catherine lived. Born in 1975 into a large farming family, she was one of the youngest daughters. Her father dedicated his life to agriculture while her mother worked as a teacher. Throughout the long summer holidays, the family would work together on the farm, cultivating a strong work ethic in their children. As a result, the children eagerly participated in farming activities from an early age. Catherine always dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, so she loved working with the animals on her father's farm. The beautiful countryside captivated her, deepening her affection for rural life. Moving to Mold aligned perfectly with her desires. Catherine dedicated herself to her studies, graduating from St. Brandon's High School and then attending community college in Barry. Not only was Catherine a dedicated student, but she also excelled academically, particularly in the natural sciences, where she ranked 3rd in the country based on her exam results. This achievement led many to believe she had a promising future ahead. After completing her secondary education, she pursued her dream of studying veterinary medicine at the University of Budapest in Hungary. At university, Catherine formed a close group of friends, including Jane Doyle, an older friend from Ireland. They shared a deep understanding. Together, they spent their free time studying, relaxing, and attending social events, all while pursuing their shared passion for veterinary medicine. After graduating as a vet, Jane found a job at a veterinary clinic in Mold, North Wales, and moved there. She then recommended Catherine for a vacancy when it became available. From the moment of interview, the clinic staff were attracted to Catherine. With her cheerful, positive attitude and high level of expertise, she demonstrated a strong passion for working with animals, winning the trust of everyone. Catherine was an outstanding psychologist, which allowed her to connect easily with the owners of her animal patients. These qualities quickly made her one of the most popular veterinarians in the city. The girls fell in love with their new environment, but since they didn't own any property, the veterinary clinic provided their accommodation, which they weren't particularly fond of. To reduce expenses, they decided to rent a house together in a nearby village called New Brighton, just a 10-minute drive from work. The year 2012 marked the peak of Catherine's and Jane's lives. At that time, Catherine was 37 years old and had been working at the veterinary clinic for a year and a half, building a strong reputation. She was attractive and charming, and her soft Irish accent attracted many men. However, she wasn't interested in starting a family yet and remained focused on her work with animals. Even when she agreed to go on dates, those relationships usually didn't last long. In October, Jane planned a weekend trip to visit her family and asked Catherine to cover her shifts at work for a few days. Jane expressed that she not only wanted to visit Ireland but was also considering the possibility of moving back permanently to care for her elderly parents. Understanding this need, Catherine agreed to help. On October 12, 2012, the day Jane was set to leave, Catherine finished her work shift at 8 p.m. as usual. She then went to a nearby store to do some shopping. CCTV footage captured her at the store entrance at 8:06 p.m. At that time, Catherine was wearing blue jeans and a brown zip-up jacket, and she carried a bright brown bag across her body. She spent about 30 minutes shopping in the store. After she was seen on camera in different departments, she was recorded again as she left, carrying a plastic bag and a pizza box. This was the last sighting of her. Since the woman lived alone, her disappearance went unnoticed at first. The following Sunday, October 14th, Catherine was scheduled to meet a work colleague for lunch, but she never contacted him. She didn't show up and ignored his attempts to reach her. This worried her friend, who had known Catherine for a long time and found her sudden silence unusual. Initially, a coworker assumed that Catherine was just sick and resting at home. The situation became urgent when Jane returned from Ireland on Sunday evening and discovered that Catherine was not home. Her car was also missing, and strangely the front door was unlocked. Jane searched the house for any signs of her friend's location but found nothing. Catherine wasn't answering her calls, and the house was filled with a strong smell of cleaning products, which struck Jane as odd. She also noticed that Catherine's personal items, like her car keys, handbag, wallet, and mobile phone, were missing. Jane assumed that Catherine had gone home for the weekend as planned. Exhausted, Jane went to bed despite not having slept well and knowing she needed to wake up early for her shift. She felt confident that Catherine would reach out to her in the morning, and perhaps they would see each other at the veterinary clinic where Jane worked. Jane woke up and looked around her house again, but there was still no sign of her friend. Her calls and messages to Catherine went unanswered. She then went to work, hoping to find her there, but Catherine didn't show up at the clinic. Instead of being angry about her absence, the clinic management was worried. They knew she hadn't been in touch since Friday when she left work. During that time, a few people received a brief text message from her, which surprised everyone because it didn't sound like her usual style. These messages were never shared publicly. Concerned for her safety, the employees decided to contact the police. Jane spent the entire day trying to reach Catherine, but her calls went unanswered. After finishing work, she went directly to the police station to report Catherine's disappearance. She shared details about Catherine's recent life, which helped the police eliminate her as a suspect. Jane also mentioned that Catherine's car was missing, which could potentially provide a clue to the investigation. The police quickly began their investigation by interviewing Catherine's friends and acquaintances. Everyone commented on her sense of responsibility, never changing her plans without informing someone. This raised concerns that something terrible might have happened to her. Police obtained surveillance camera footage that showed the Catherine's movements from the veterinary clinic to a nearby store. After she left the parking lot, her trail went cold, making it impossible to track her any further. Catherine's parents, who live in Ireland, were promptly informed of the situation. They mentioned that their daughter had not visited them over the weekend and that they hadn't seen or heard from her in several days. Catherine's sister-in-law flew in from Wales to assist the police in the investigation and the search for Catherine. Immediately, they turned to the public through the media to gather any information about her. Unfortunately, no useful information was received. No information was received until October 16th. During this time, police believed that the Catherine might have been a victim of a crime. While no blood stains were found, but police did discover fresh male DNA on her bed linen during an inspection of the victim's house. They also found a piece of cloth tied around the bedpost. It appeared that someone had come to see her while her friend was away, tied her up, and then had an intimate encounter with her. Forensic experts discovered evidence at the scene and sent it to the lab for analysis. On the evening of October 14th, while Jane was trying to contact Catherine, she received a call from Clive Sharp, Catherine's then 40-year-old boyfriend. They had argued shortly before Catherine went missing. And now Clive wanted to attract Jane's attention and buy her a present. However, Jane did not answer his phone. Before this incident, Catherine and Clive had been dating for several months. Clive, who worked as a sales consultant, lived about 150 kilometers away from Jane and Catherine's home. Despite the distance, he frequently visited them. Catherine met Clive through a dating app, and Jane was already acquainted with him. Clive often spent time at their house, but Catherine felt uncomfortable around him and preferred to leave whenever he arrived. This information reached the police, prompting them to investigate Clive's background more closely. The day after Catherine was reported missing, the police arrested Clive Sharp on suspicion of her murder. At that point, however, the investigation lacked both Catherine's body and any concrete evidence against him. Charges could not be brought against the man, so police couldn't detain him for long without evidence. However, they did obtain permission to search his car and collected material for DNA analysis, which was sent for examination. At the same time, police gathered information on the main suspect in the veterinarian's disappearance. At the same time, the police gathered information about Clive. They checked his police record. Clive has a criminal record. Despite his charming appearance, he spent 14 years in prison. His crimes were mainly sexual assault. He was first convicted of such acts at the age of 16, when he sent obscene letters and was aggressive towards a number of girls. At 17, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for rape after attacking a 15-year-old girl and threatening her with a piece of glass. After his release, it seems that Clive tried to turn his life around. He went into hiding for a while, got married, and had a daughter with his wife, Gillian. For many years, he remained off the radar of police and was not involved in any reported crimes. However, his attempts to build a normal family life did not last long. Gillian died of drug addiction. This may have had a huge impact on him. In 1995, at 26, Clive was imprisoned again for sexually assaulting his friend's wife, receiving a 5-year sentence. Just a few months after his release, he was incarcerated once more, this time for a more serious crime. He attacked a woman, bound her, raped her, and threatened her with a knife, resulting in an 8-year sentence. Remarkably, he was granted parole after serving just 5 years. In 2003, he was released and remarried. By 2011, he had ended a previous relationship and was now in a tense relationship with his girlfriend, Catherine Gowing, who had gone missing. The police found this suspicious coincidence. As a result, Clive Sharp became the prime suspect and was arrested. While in prison, he attended a specialist program designed to help sex offenders control their urges. In this program, he publicly detailed his disturbing behavior, including tying up women and threatening them. After committing the violence, he envisions two outcomes. He will lose interest and release the victim, or he will fantasize about killing them, envisioning scenarios in which he strangles or drowns them. The program was discontinued in 2017 after convincing evidence that it did not help solve the problem of sex offenders. While in prison, Clive claimed he had an alibi for the time when Catherine disappeared, saying he was visiting relatives. Interestingly, his daughter and her stepfather supported his claim, stating they saw him that weekend and he appeared calm. However, this did not rule out the possibility that Clive could have harmed Catherine. He could have attacked her, disposed of her body, and then gone to visit his relatives. The police examined this information for inconsistencies in Clive's story and increased their scrutiny. They soon discovered that Clive Sharp was lying. DNA test results from Catherine's bed showed a 100% match with samples taken from Clive. This indicated that he had sexual intercourse with Catherine. No one believed that the encounter was consensual. Catherine had disliked Clive and actively avoided any communication with him. The search for Catherine continued, but hopes of her safe return were slim, especially after Clive revealed he had violent fantasies. Just 2 days later, a couple walking near the abandoned Pin Flame Quarry, just a few miles from Catherine's home, discovered the burned-out car. They quickly called the police. Although the car was badly damaged, the police were quick to confirm that it belonged to Catherine. By this time, news of Catherine's murder had spread throughout the community. However, no body was found in the car, and no further evidence of what had happened had emerged. As a result, many had given up hope of finding Catherine alive. Meanwhile, Clive Sharp continued to deny any involvement in her disappearance. On October 19th, the prosecutor's office concluded that they had enough evidence to charge him with Catherine's murder. Even without a body, preparations began for a long and contentious trial, with the prosecution attempting to gather all available evidence. The investigation into Clive's guilt and the search for her body is ongoing near Catherine's home, where her burnt-out car was discovered. The search involves police, volunteers, helicopters, dogs and divers who have checked all the nearby waters. On January 7, 2013, Clive had not confessed to the murder. However, the search did not last long, as divers soon found human remains in a lake near a quarry, close to the location of the burned car. Dismembered body parts were found in the reservoir, approximately 3 kilometers away. All of the remains were sent to a laboratory for testing. Experts determined that the body parts belonged to Catherine. Unfortunately, as some body parts were missing, the cause of death could not be determined. After an extensive search of the reservoir, no further remains were found. The parts that were found were sent back to Ireland for Catherine's family. Catherine's funeral was held in County Offaly, Ireland, where her family received support. Clive Sharp's trial began on January 14, 2013. Unexpectedly, he confessed to his crimes at the outset of the trial, on the advice of his lawyer, which significantly accelerated the proceedings. However, this was not because he felt remorse, but because he had little choice, as the prosecution had overwhelming evidence against him, including DNA and the cloth used to bind the victim. While the prosecution presented a detailed account of the harrowing events, the Clive remained evasive and did not fully explain what transpired in the house. According to the prosecutor, on October 12, 2012, Clive broke into Catherine's home while she was alone. He monitored her until she went to bed, then entered the house and attacked her in the bedroom, restraining her to the bed. It is believed he covered her mouth to stop her screaming for help before raping her repeatedly and eventually strangling her. After the attack, Clive went to buy cleaning supplies. He was captured on surveillance cameras at the store where Catherine had been seen alive the previous day. He bought garbage bags, cleaning products, a can of gasoline, and a Halloween mask from a nearby construction store. He also acquired a hacksaw and some blades. Upon returning to Catherine's house, he began to dismember her body, packing the pieces into bags and loading them into his car. He then cleaned the crime scene meticulously, making it impossible for forensic scientists to determine where he had dismembered her. He disposed of the remains in the water and destroyed all her belongings, including her car, which he soaked with gasoline and set on fire. To cover up his actions, Clive sold his old car and bought a new one the very next day. He boasted about this new car to Jane while she was trying to learn what had happened to Catherine. The old car was located, and the police obtained a search warrant. During the search, they discovered fabric that matched the material used to restrain the Catherine, along with blood stains and Clive's DNA. Additionally, geolocation data from his mobile phone confirmed that Clive was near the lake and at the location where the burnt car was found right after the crime. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Clive refused to speak about the crime during the investigation. Another shocking detail emerged. The intended victim of Clive that night may have been another woman for whom he also had feelings. He tried to break into her house around 10 p.m. on the same night he attacked Catherine. Although they had been involved previously, she ended the relationship due to his rude behavior. When Clive tried to tie her up and harm her, she told him to stop and leave, which he complied with. Clive drove to Catherine's house to fulfill his disturbing desire. Around midnight, he parked nearby where he could see her house clearly. Recorded on CCTV, he waited until about an hour after she went to bed before taking action. After the attack, he returned to his car and spent an hour and a half reflecting on what he had done. He went back to Catherine's house around 3 a.m., knowing she was alone and using a key that Jane had given him, which eliminated any barriers. During the trial, Clive confessed but offered few new details. He kept his head down and avoided looking at the prosecution or Catherine's family. Ultimately, Clive Sharp was found guilty of murdering Catherine Gowing. The prosecution requested a minimum sentence of 42 years, but due to his guilty plea, this was reduced to 37 years. A monument to Catherine was later built in the Catholic Church in Buckley, funded by employees of the veterinary clinic where she worked. A year and a half after the crime, Catherine's friend Jane was still deeply affected following Catherine's death. Jane left her job at the veterinary clinic and moved to Northwest England to start over. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Solomon family. Angela grew up in a religious family in Nashville, USA. She was talented in singing and excelled academically. Then, she earned a doctorate in pharmacy and was successful in her career, which allowed her to earn a good income. She bought a house and lived a fulfilling life. In 2001, she reconnected with Aaron Solomon, a charismatic guy she had known since school. He was a sports presenter on a TV channel and made a good impression on her. The couple started dating, and just a few months later, Angela became pregnant with a son. In 2002, their first child was born, named Grant. Immediately after that, Aaron proposed to Angela, but their relationship was complicated, and she was unsure about marriage. She initially planned to raise the child on her own. However, her religious family pressured her to marry, and she eventually agreed. Aaron turned out to be a caring father and loving husband. And their relationship improved. For years after their wedding, in October 2006, they welcomed a daughter named Gracie. Grant, who was 4 years old at the time, was thrilled to have a younger sister. He stayed by her crib and helped his mother with her care. Then, he began playing baseball and became a successful player on his school team, gaining popularity among his peers. After the birth of Gracie, the parents' relationship worsened. Aaron was a controlling and possessive man who insulted his wife and children while having multiple affairs. He used his status as a presenter to start many affairs. In 2013, 7 years old, Gracie told her mother that her father was bothering her during bath time. It was discovered that Aaron had prohibited his wife from bathing their daughter, insisting on doing it himself, and even filmed his daughter without clothes. Angela forbade Aaron from bathing or touching their daughter. Although he admitted to his actions, he threatened Angela, warning that he would take their children away if Angela told anyone. As an active church member, he demanded complete obedience from his family, so Angela felt compelled to remain silent. Angela finds out that Aaron has cheated on many other girls and learned he was molesting minors. In 2014, explicit photos of minors were found on his phone, but the incident was covered up and he lost his job. However, then he found a new job as a financial consultant at a large bank. The couple began to argue more often. Angela wanted a divorce, but Aaron refused and suggested they see a family psychologist. Angela agreed, and during therapy, it was revealed that she had been dealing with victim syndrome throughout her life. Her parents had been harsh, imposing their religious beliefs on her, and she had entered an unfortunate marriage with Aaron, who was narcissistic and struggled with sexual addiction. The sessions didn't help with their family problems. Angela found another psychologist she trusted and shared all the details of her life and family issues. She started considering a plan to leave Aaron, who was controlling and wouldn't let her go. She kept notes on her phone and communicated with the psychologist via email. However, Aaron was secretly listening to her therapy sessions, checking her phone and email, and was aware of all her plans. She complained to her parents about Aaron's troubling behavior, but they didn't support her. They sided with he, believing, due to their faith, that a woman should endure her husband's behavior and keep the household intact. She felt unsupported by everyone. Aaron's behavior deteriorated, and he started to become violent towards his wife and children. The children, wanting to protect their mother, they began sleeping in the same room out of fear of their father. One day, Aaron attacked Angela in the bathroom, attempting to strangle her with a hairdryer cord. She was ready to say goodbye to life when her 11-year-old son, Grant, intervened and managed to stop his father. Terrified, she and the children chose not to tell anyone about the incident and did not report Aaron to the police. However, he called 911, falsely claiming that she had tried to end your life using the cord. She was then hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation, despite asserting that she was mentally sound. Eventually, doctors reassured her that she was indeed healthy. Angela's psychotherapist learned about her situation and shared their correspondence, explaining that Angela was a victim of domestic violence. Angela was discharged from the hospital on May 11, 2013, and was advised to obtain a restraining order against her husband. Medical records confirmed she was not depressed, had no end-your-life thoughts, no history of mental health issues. However, she was indeed a victim of domestic violence and was in a dangerous situation. After her release, Angela was determined to secure a restraining order against her husband and file for divorce. Upon returning home, she found the house empty. She attempted to contact Aaron, but he did not respond. She also tried calling her own parents and his parents, but received no answer. Her relatives dismissed her as mentally ill and ignored her. The next day, May 12, was Mother's Day. Angela hoped Aaron would bring the children to visit her, but instead, the police arrived at her house. He had falsely reported to 911 that she was attempting to end your life. The police checked on her, but they found no cause for concern and left. Time passed, and Angela received a restraining order but still did not know where the children were. She contacted the police several times, asking them to locate the children, but they refused to take her statement because the children were with their father, Darren, who had the legal right to have them. He had not kidnapped them. She soon discovered that he had filed for divorce first and had obtained a restraining order against her. He claimed she was a danger to him and the children. Divorce proceedings began, and both his parents and her parents spoke against her. As a result, he was granted full custody of the children, and the court ordered she to pay child support. The children were not present in court and were not asked with whom they wanted to stay. The judge noted that she had been in a mental hospital, which was enough to deny her custody claims. She couldn't do anything about her children. Angela continued to live with her father and fought hard to challenge the guardianship, arguing that the children were not well with Aaron. A retrial for the guardianship case was scheduled. He hired top lawyers for the case, having recently received a large inheritance from a wealthy aunt who had passed away. During the trial, Angela's relatives once again testified against her, alleging she was intent to end her life. However, this time, psychotherapists and staff from the psychiatric hospital defended her. They confidently stated that she was a victim of Aaron's abusive behavior and had never attempted to end her life. Her injuries were inflicted by her husband. Despite this, the judge ignored their testimony and awarded full custody to Aaron. Angela did not give up and repeatedly challenged the custody decision, eventually securing the right to see her children for 2 hours a week. When she finally saw them, she was shocked by their condition. Both Grant and Gracie had lost weight, and Gracie had severe bruises under her eyes. Aaron disciplined them harshly, using physical violence, enforcing a strict diet, and banning unhealthy and sweet foods. Grant once jumped out of a moving car to escape from his father and was injured. The children were told by their father that their mother, Angela, was dead when she was actually placed in a mental hospital. He also said it was unsafe there, so they needed to move. The children believed their father at the time because they saw their mother in a bad state after being strangled and felt hopeless, thinking no one could help them. Angela fought to gain full custody of the children, which required her to undergo a psychiatric examination to prove her mental health. She passed the examination successfully. In 2014, the court increased Angela's child visitation rights to 6 hours per week, but kept the children with their father. She continued her legal battle. In early 2015, Angela received devastating news. Aaron had been raping 9-year-old Gracie for several months. The frightened girl felt she couldn't tell anyone. She described feeling sleepy and falling asleep after eating. Then she wake up in her father's bed with severe pain in her crotch and bruises on her thighs. She didn't know how the bruises got there. Her father, Aaron, claimed it was a rash from her bathing suit, but she knew that wasn't true. He never took them to the doctor, fearing exposure, even when they were very sick. Gracie recounted how Aaron beat them, drove recklessly to scare them, and neglected their basic needs. Angela was horrified by this information and tried to use it to gain custody of the children from Aaron, their abusive father, awaiting a new trial. In April 2015, Aaron filed a complaint against Angela for not paying child support, leading to her arrest. She argued that Aaron was not properly caring for the children and was using the child support money for himself and his lovers, despite having inherited wealth. Angela was later released and continued to pay child support. She fought for her children for several more years, reporting Aaron to law enforcement, contacting his church, and warning the church school about the danger he posed. However, no one took her seriously, and everyone thought she was crazy. In 2018, Grant and Gracie ran away from home. Aaron immediately contacted the police, and the children were found quickly. When they returned, Aaron punished them harshly. Angela, upon discovering this, requested an emergency custody hearing due to Aaron's abusive behavior. On August 17, 2018, during Grant's baseball tournament, Aaron and Gracie came to watch the match. After the match, Aaron took Gracie with him, while Grant stayed at the sports camp. Aaron rented a hotel room with only one bed for the night. Despite 12-year-old Gracie's request for a room with 2 beds, Aaron raped her that night. The following day, on August 18th, an emergency custody hearing took place. Gracie disclosed what her father had done, but Aaron's lawyer denied the allegations, suggesting that Gracie imagined the incident and arguing that Aaron, being a loving father, couldn't have committed such an act. Later, Grant testified that his father was abusive, beat him, fed him poorly, humiliated him, and forced him to train all day. Both children expressed their desire to live with their mother, not their father. However, the judge did not believe them. He concluded that Angela and the children were lying to damage Aaron's reputation because Aaron attended the same Grace Church as the judge and a senator, where he was well regarded. This was a closed, deeply religious community. Aaron attended church every Sunday, never missing an event, and was well regarded by the community's elite. People couldn't believe that Aaron was capable of such monstrous behavior. And there is no evidence that he abused the children. The judge dismissed Angela's request for custody. During the trial, Gracie clung to her mother and was reluctant to leave with her father. However, when her father threatened to call the police, she had no choice but to go with him. The mother lost custody rights, but the children were unable to stay with their father either. Gracie and Grant sought help from school staff, a psychologist, and the church, sharing the terrible things their father had done to them. However, the principal called them in and urged them to remain silent to protect both their and their father's reputations. Despite their efforts to explain why they didn't want to return home, the principal dismissed their claims, saying he had heard it all before and didn't believe them. He contacted their father, who then removed them from school. Nobody believed the children, as everyone thought Angela had coerced them into falsely accusing their father. One day, Gracie and Grant couldn't take it anymore and ran to their mother. Angela. Then, Aaron came to look for them and asked them to return. Grant and Gracie refused, and he allowed them to live temporarily with their mother. With the help of therapy, they set boundaries, and their father began to respect them. Grant and Gracie sometimes had to live with their father, as he still had more custody rights, but most of the time they lived with their mother. During those times, they were happy, and the relationship with their father became more tense and reached its peak. On July 20, 2020, 18-year-old Grant was driving to his training, which was about an hour away from Angela's house. Upon arriving at the parking lot, a tragic accident occurred in which Grant lost his life. His father, Aaron, who was also at the training, witnessed the incident. He immediately called 911 for help for his son. Aaron later recounted the event. Aaron explained that he had exited his pickup truck to retrieve his gear from the back. While standing in the parking lot near the building, he was focused on his phone and did not notice the pickup rolling backwards. The vehicle hit him, dragging him several meters before it went down a deep ditch. Aaron, who was there with 3 others, saw everything unfold. When the police arrived, they found Grant lying on his back beneath the front of a car, but the tires were not touching him. Blood was streaming from his nose and ears. Using a jack, they managed to lift the car and pulled him out. He was still breathing, so they performed CPR and rushed him to the hospital. Unfortunately, despite their efforts, Grant, who was in serious condition, died on the way without regaining consciousness. Although he had multiple injuries, but the official cause of death was cardiac arrest. Strangely, Aaron accompanied him to the hospital and signed papers preventing an autopsy and organ donation. When Angela learned about the incident, she hurried to the hospital and requested an autopsy, but her pleas were ignored. The police classified the case as an accident and didn't pursue further investigation. Angela believed Aaron's account of the incident was false, pointing to various inconsistencies. Grant's injuries didn't match those of someone trapped under a car. He had no typical crushing injuries. The hospital recorded just 1 head injury and 3 bruises, on his jaw, left hip, and right hip. Aaron claimed Grant drove a pickup for about an hour to reach his training, yet there were no burn marks from a hot car, nor were there abrasions from being dragged on asphalt. At the scene of the tragedy, there was no blood, and Grant's shoes were completely clean, which contradicted Aaron's story. The grass near the car's exit and the path where the body was dragged were untouched. There weren't even tire tracks where they should have been. Instead, they were found on the other side of the sidewalk. Grant's glasses were discovered there too. He always wore his glasses because he had poor vision without them, shown in all his photos. So, how did his glasses end up on the sidewalk if he wasn't there? He was in the parking lot. Why didn't his glasses fall there when the car allegedly ran over him? According to Aaron, Grant had his back to the car and didn't see it coming when it moved in reverse. Strangely, Grant was found lying on his back under the car but in the opposite direction. How could his body have turned 180 degrees under the car? It seems impossible. Furthermore, how could the car back into the ditch and then get back up and out of the ditch? It was hard to believe. None of the people in the nearby buildings heard Grant's screams, which should have been heard during such an accident. Everything happened quietly, so no one saw or heard anything. There were no CCTV cameras, and the three guys Aaron mentioned on the call were not there either. Strangely, Aaron did not attempt to rescue his son from the car, even though Aaron was briefly with him. Aaron just watched as his son died. Grant never stored equipment in the back of the car. He always left his uniform on the back seat. The phone Aaron claimed Grant was using was never found. Although Grant always carried his phone with him and called his girlfriend every morning, he didn't call that day for some reason. There was no damage to the car. Even though the rear bumper of this car model is fragile and prone to breaking, it was intact. It would have been damaged in such a descent. There were no witnesses to this tragic accident. A man saw Aaron walking along the road shortly before the tragedy, in the parking lot. It's unclear what he was doing there, although Aaron claimed he arrived later. At his son's funeral, Aaron described his death as a divine act, leaving everyone surprised. People were shocked by Aaron's lack of emotion. He showed no grief for his son. Angela suspected that he may have hit their son with his car elsewhere and staged the accident by bringing their son to the location afterwards. There was confusion as to why the pickup truck unexpectedly rolled away, as it had been parked correctly and had no previous issues. It was speculated that the truck might have had a technical fault, and although Aaron initially suggested investigating it to sue the manufacturer for compensation, he eventually declined, which was out of character for him since he usually pursued financial gains. He continued to drive the truck without any concern for several months. Angela wanted to investigate the truck herself, but Aaron strongly opposed the idea and promptly sent the vehicle to the scrapyard. This was puzzling, as the truck was in excellent condition and could have been sold for a good price. Angela managed to locate the vehicle in spring 2021 and arranged for an independent examination. Experts concluded that the accident could not have occurred as Aaron had claimed. Angela then pushed for the investigation of the case, which had been closed, to be reopened. Grant had just turned 18, according to Angela, and he had always protected Gracie's from their abusive father. He warned his father that as soon as he turned 18, he would go to court. He and his sister Gracie planned to formally free themselves from their father's control, believing the court would take them more seriously as adults. In Angela's opinion, Aaron feared this and decided to stop his son. Gracie was devastated by the loss of her beloved brother, who could protect her. On May 12, 2021, Gracie, then 14, uploaded an 18-minute video on YouTube in which she described her father, Aaron, as a monster. She claimed that he attempted to kill their mother, raped her, and physically abused both her and Grant, eventually killing Grant's. Gracie fears that her father might harm her now that her brother is gone. They are defenseless, and their father started harassing them. Despite a restraining order, Erin continued to stalk she and begged her to return home, but she refused. She was granted legal protection, but her father ignored it and kept following her from school. Due to the school principal's friendship with he from church, they refused to enforce the restraining order. After this interview, Erin once again complained that Gracie was being negatively influenced and turned against him. He persuaded she that she imagined everything and that her mother had suggested the idea of rape. Erin filed a defamation lawsuit against Angela, gathering people who refuted the information in the video Gracie recorded. He claimed Angela demanded he give up custody and threatened him. Angela was determined to seek justice. At the trial, Erin withdrew the lawsuit but is considering refiling with a new legal team. Angela and her daughter Gracie are striving for justice for Grant. Gracie prefers to live with her mother and not see her father. They launched a website and gathered support from many people after Grant's death. However, the pastor, the school principal, and other individuals denied any involvement. One of Grant's classmates mentioned that she, along with Gracie, asked the school administration to intervene and protect them from Erin, but the school dismissed their request, saying it was beyond their responsibility. In Tennessee, there is a law requiring anyone who suspects child abuse to report it to the Department of Children. However, no one reported anything in this case. After Grant's death, students were not allowed to discuss the tragedy at school. Later, the pastor left the church, causing a significant split within the congregation. Currently, Erin has not been charged with any crimes related to Grant, and he denies all accusations against him. Erin's supporters occasionally post on social media, accusing Gracie and Angela of lying and behaving unchristianly. Angela and Gracie live together but are afraid of Erin. Gracie aspires to become an FBI agent to help people through investigations. The tragic story of the Solomon family leaves behind many painful and unforgettable lessons about domestic abuse and violence, as well as society's indifference to victims. Through this story, we clearly see the need to protect children and vulnerable family members from abusive acts. At the same time, the importance of support from the community and authorities is also emphasized. Let's speak up together and protect the vulnerable so that no family has to endure such pain again. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Matthew Eapen. Sunil and Deborah got married in 1990 after meeting in medical college. Sunil, from Chicago, USA, followed his father's path and became an anesthesiologist, while Deborah worked as an ophthalmologist. Their first child, Brendan, was born in 1994, and their second child, Matthew, born May 24, 1996. They are young parents working in the medical field. They face significant challenges balancing their careers and family life. Both came from respected families with successful backgrounds in education and medicine, motivating them to achieve similar success. They lived in a prestigious area of Boston, Massachusetts, in a lovely home and were financially comfortable enough to hire a nanny. The nanny became like a family member, handling both childcare and household duties, and lived on their property. Deborah soon returned to work part-time, having completed advanced training courses during her pregnancy. Balancing her professional responsibilities with family care was difficult and stressful. The high workload placed on the nannies often led to them leaving due to stress or being dismissed if they couldn't meet the family's expectations. Before hiring 18-year-old Louise Woodward from Cheshire, Great Britain, they used to employ 3 other nannies. Louise lived with her family until she turned 18, then decided to take a gap year in the United States before continuing her education. Although she didn't have formal training, she loved children and got along well with them. She registered as a nanny and housekeeper with a recruiting agency, which helped her move to Boston and find a job. In December 1996, she started working for the Sunil family, whose youngest child, Matthew, was only 8 months old. She had no prior experience with infants, including changing diapers, and had only 3 days of training before she began her job. Louise was given the responsibility of caring for Matthew and 2 years old Brendan and assisting with household chores. She quickly found the workload overwhelming due to the family's busy daily routine. All this workload went against Louise's plans, as she had come to the USA seeking adventure and enjoyment, not to work without any days off. She initially thought that being a nanny would provide her with a livelihood without much responsibility. However, looking after children aged 8 months and 2 years truly requires experience, training, and a sense of responsibility. It is challenging to expect an 18 years old to have such expertise without proper training. Despite this, Sunil and Deborah, who were desperate for help, accepted Louise since they needed a nanny housekeeper. Furthermore, her services were affordable. However, Louise's behavior did not meet the family's high standards, so they gave her a list of rules to follow. As a young nanny, she had little choice because previous failures with other families had put her at risk of being dismissed by the agency. She needed to keep her job to maintain her income. It was challenging for her to suppress her youthful, free spirit, as she preferred to walk, chat with friends, and attend parties rather than focus on work. Occasionally, she would wander around Boston and indulge in her dreams. However, she started refusing work more often, frequently asking for time off, and spending a lot of time on herself. She began taking daily walks, returning late in the evening, regularly attending parties, and struggling to wake up in the morning, often sleeping until nearly lunchtime. This behavior disappointed the Epens, as she would spend hours chatting with her family in the UK, neglecting her responsibilities with the children. One day, Deborah came home from work earlier than usual and found the children sleeping at home alone without any supervision. Later, the nanny Louise returned from a party. There were suspicions that similar incidents had occurred before. Naturally, Sunil and Deborah felt worried about their children and they were not happy with her. They spoke to her and imposed a curfew, but it didn't solve the problem. They were very unhappy with her behavior and felt they weren't getting their money's worth for services. Although they still wanted to trust her, they saw her as lazy and irresponsible. So, the relationship which she began to significantly deteriorate a few days before the unfortunate incident. She openly told Sunil that she didn't enjoy being a nanny and didn't want children because it was difficult, yet she pleaded not to be fired because she desperately needed the job. Sunil made more rules to discipline her, to get the nanny at the level they desired. On February 3, 1997, Deborah informed Louise that she could leave if anything was not to her liking. However, Louise, the nanny, resisted the idea, insisting there was no need to rush and that she was willing to accept and adhere to their new, stricter conditions. They agreed but mentioned they needed to change the children's sleep schedule by limiting sleep after 3 p.m. to prevent disrupting their nighttime rest. This change was not aimed at Louise personally but was necessary to reorganize the children's daily routine. Shortly after this, a terrible tragedy occurred. The tragedy happened just 10 weeks after Louise began her job. On February 4, 1997, Louise woke the children up in the morning after the parents left for work. She mentioned that Matthew was unusually fussy and cried a lot from the start of the day. Louise bathed him and then put him back to bed to calm him down. At 3:15 p.m., she went to wake him up from his nap and noticed he was breathing weakly and irregularly. She took him to the living room to perform CPR, but he remained unconscious. Initially, she couldn't reach Sunil and Deborah and only called 911 at 3:45 p.m. to report that Matthew, the 8-month-old, was not breathing. Louise informed the coordinator that the baby might have choked on vomit because his face was turning blue. Emergency services arrived quickly. The child was alive but in critical condition. The doctors rushed him to the children's hospital, where they found that Matthew had much more severe injuries than initially reported. Matthew, an 8-month-old baby, was found to have a 10-centimeter crack at the base of his skull, bleeding in his eyes, a hematoma between the skull and brain, and bleeding in his neck and back of the brain. He also had a broken wrist, and vomit was found in his trachea. He was urgently taken to the operating room for brain surgery and connected him to a life support machine because he was in a coma. Experienced doctors suggested that these injuries were caused by being violently shaken and hit on the head. In pediatrics, this is known as shaken baby syndrome. Babies are born with disproportionately large heads and weak neck muscles, making them vulnerable to injury when shaken. The unfixed head will dangle when shaken, causing damage to brain cell membranes and brain injury. When a baby is shaken, the brain moves back and forth inside the skull, leading to swelling and bleeding. Adults often shake babies out of frustration when they cry, not realizing it won't calm them down but will make them cry more. Continued shaking can cause severe injuries or even be fatal. Most cases occur in children up to 2 years old, but even a 4 years old can suffer greatly from such shaking. Around 4 p.m., Deborah, Matthew's mother, noticed she had missed a call from Louise at 3:15 p.m. and also saw an urgent text message from she. Concerned, she left her patient at the hospital and called she, who explained the situation. Deborah was furious. She asked for leave from work and rushed to the hospital where Matthew was admitted. On the way, she prayed that her son would be okay. Upon arrival, she informed the doctors of her medical expertise, as she was an ophthalmologist, and asked to examine her baby. She quickly discovered severe Matthew's eye hemorrhaging. Meanwhile, the doctors alerted the police about the baby's serious injuries, prompting law enforcement to visit the Epen family home to question the nanny. Louise was at home, looking upset and concerned, with Brendan. She explained that Matthew had been irritable and difficult since the morning, and despite her efforts to calm him, nothing worked. By the end of the conversation, she confessed to possibly being a bit harsh with him. Overwhelmed by his continuous crying and screaming, she shook him to try to soothe him, but it was ineffective. In frustration, she threw him onto a pile of towels on the bed. While taking him to the bathroom, she accidentally dropped him, which caused him to hit his head on the floor. Her account was alarming, given the severity of Matthew's injuries. The following day, the police arrested Louise on charges of assaulting a child. Matthew's condition was not improving, and doctors were sure he had no hope of recovery. The brain injury was so severe that, even if he survived, he would be paralyzed for life. Sunil and Deborah, who were also medically educated, understood this. On February 9, 1997, they made the difficult decision to disconnect Matthew from life support, worsening Louise's situation as she was accused of murder. She was denied bail before the trial, but continued to insist on her innocence, maintaining it was a tragic accident. Before the trial on May 7, 1997, Louise agreed to take a polygraph test. During the test, she was asked if she had caused physical harm to Matthew on that day. She denied causing any injury, and a lie detector expert concluded her answers were truthful with 95% confidence. Another expert, hired by her lawyers, also confirmed that she answered all questions truthfully. On October 7, 1997, a trial began in Cambridge, Massachusetts, involving many medical experts, including neurosurgeons, pediatricians, ophthalmologists, and pathologists, all of whom were familiar with similar crimes. In the courtroom, there was extensive discussion about Matthew's injuries and Louise's behavior. Most experts believed that his injuries were caused by abuse and violence. Many doubted Louise's statement that she had accidentally hit the boy's head, noting that the injuries showed signs of blunt force trauma. The child had probably been severely and brutally beaten, and the injuries appeared fresh. An expert for the prosecution initially compared Matthew's injury to those from a fall from the second floor, but this statement was later withdrawn. The defense argued that Matthew's head and wrist injuries occurred weeks prior to the incident, before the nanny was in their home. The lawyer suggested that the child's parents, Sunil and Deborah, could have been involved in neglect or abuse. In court, Louise stated that she had not noticed any injuries to Matthew's head or arm. She explained that her interaction with the child was mild, but it caused the reopening of an old injury, leading to bleeding. She mentioned that the day before the tragic incident, the child fell near the stairs and hurt himself, which might have aggravated the injury. Louise clarified that her use of British English was misunderstood. When she said popped, she meant she placed the child on the bed. Not through him, as might be interpreted in American English, and she denied dropping the baby in the bathtub. The defense argued that if the prosecution's claim of cruel treatment were true, Matthew would have had serious bruises and hematomas on the head and body, which were not present. This suggests that the child might have been shaken to calm him down, but not to the extent the prosecution claimed. Louise, in an emotional outburst, lost control and shook the child, causing old injuries to resurface. Witnesses and experts testified that there was no fresh bleeding in the brain, indicating that the skull fracture was an older injury. However, Sunil and Deborah denied that Matthew had suffered such a traumatic brain injury. The defense suggested that these actions might have been driven by fear, as Louise panicked while trying to revive the child. Unfortunately, Brendan could not testify at the trial because he was too young to understand what had happened. During the trial, Louise acted inappropriately. She occasionally smirked and laughed, which was attributed to nervous shock. At the time, she was reportedly only 18 years old, and the incident described triggered such a reaction. Additionally, she retracted her initial testimony obtained by detectives during the first interview. She did not mention how challenging it was to work for the Eapen family, who overwhelmed her with childcare and household duties, for which she was unprepared. She had come to the United States to relax and have fun. Despite this, she insisted that she never mistreated the children. She claimed she would never harm a child, especially to the extent of causing serious injuries that led to a coma and could paralyze an 8-month-old baby. Louise's relatives from the UK spoke at the trial, praising her as a gentle and reserved person. They described her as an obedient parishioner of a local church, a vegetarian, and a clarinet player. However, her friends from the US had a different view, seeing her as a party girl who never missed a chance to go out. 3 of her friends testified at the trial, as well as former employers who had let her go due to incompetence and irresponsibility. The prosecution highlighted that she tried to wake Matthew 15 to 20 times but found the boy wasn't breathing. She attempted to help him and called his parents, but they didn't answer. It took her half an hour to finally call 911. The prosecutor questioned why she delayed calling for emergency help when immediate action was needed. She explained that she was panicking and stressed, trying hard to manage the situation on her own. Throughout the trial, Louise showed little emotion. She occasionally smiled but never expressed regret for what happened. She spoke fondly of Brendan and Matthew, she describing Brendan as smart and talkative, and Matthew as a sweet, smiling, and playful child. The trial was broadcast live on British television, capturing the attention of almost the entire country, with many people supporting she. On October 30, 1997, a jury found Louise Woodward guilty of second-degree murder. She begged the judge to lighten her sentence. She begged them not to let her spend the rest of her life in prison for something she didn't do. However, the judge ignored her pleas. Louise was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Upon hearing the sentence, she burst into tears, unable to believe what was happening. She questioned the judge, insisting that she hadn't done anything wrong and sincerely hoped for an acquittal. Her mother supported her, stating in court that a terrible judicial error had occurred. She argued that her daughter could not have harmed a defenseless child and that she was innocent and did not deserve such a harsh punishment. In fact, the jury's opinions were mixed. Many people believe that Louise is innocent in Matthew's death, attributing it to an old injury. However, after further deliberation, the jury concluded she was guilty. It later emerged that those who initially supported acquittal were persuaded to vote guilty. This thing sparked significant public outcry in both the United States and Louise's home country, Britain. Many people in the UK donated funds to assist Louise and her family, totaling about $500,000. Additionally, there were mass protests from supporters who believed Louise was an innocent victim of the US legal system. This public pressure led to the conviction being overturned by the judge 10 days later. By then, Louise had already spent about 8 months in prison. After reviewing the case materials, the new judge concluded that Louise's actions were due to her inexperience and immaturity, not malicious intent, and that murder was not her purpose. Louise was sentenced to the time she had already spent in prison awaiting trial, which was 289 days, allowing her to be immediately released. Her supporters celebrated her release like a holiday. Meanwhile, the death of Matthew, the 8-month-old child, was largely overlooked. Even if his death wasn't her fault, his parents sought justice for their child, and the prosecutor was determined to see Louise imprisoned for a longer period. He noted that he had recently been involved in a trial where a father was accused of killing a child in a similar case, and that father remained in prison. He questioned why Louise, a nanny, was released, viewing it as unfair and contradictory given the prevalence of similar cases in U.S. judicial practice. Louise was released from prison after serving less time than it took. She returned to her hometown in the UK in 1998 and enrolled in the Faculty of Law at London South Bank University. She explained that her interest in law developed during the trial, as she engaged deeply with legal matters to better understand the proceedings. Thus, choosing law as a profession felt natural and obvious to her. While pursuing her studies, Louise decided to fulfill another dream, learning to dance. She took salsa lessons and later opened her own dance school, becoming a dance instructor. Her classes included children, often accompanied by their mothers, who were comfortable with her past and aware of the accusations against her. In 2002, Louise graduated with honors from university and began working as a lawyer. However, a year later, she left her law firm to return to her dance studio. She then married businessman Anthony Elkis, who worked in cargo transportation, and they had a daughter. By 2014, Louise had authored several books and participated in numerous interviews about past incident. In all interviews, she has insisted that she was wrongly accused of Matthew's death. She insisted she had no intention to harm and believed her arrest was unjust. She remarked that the U.S. judicial system often demands accountability, suggesting that if the parents weren't blamed, the suspicion fell on her. Still, she expressed relief and gratitude that the judicial system ultimately resolved the case, leading to her release. Louise, now 45 years old, continues to live a normal life without feeling guilty about the past, and many people support her in this. In one of her interviews, she stated that she had the right to enjoy her life. Meanwhile, the parents of Matthew, Deborah, and Sunil faced public outrage. People criticized them for prioritizing their careers over spending time with their children, questioning why they hired an inexperienced young nanny who was not equipped to care for small children. Despite knowing this, they were attracted because the cost of hiring her would be very low and burdened her with excessive responsibilities. The 18-year-old nanny, Louise, received only 3 days of training before being overwhelmed with numerous restrictions and rules. Due to public pressure, the Epen family had to relocate to a new, undisclosed address. It is known that they now have 2 more children and no longer hire nannies, with Deborah taking on the responsibility of raising the children herself. They established the Matthew Eapen Foundation at Boston Children's Hospital to enhance child safety and well-being by educating the public about the dangers of shaking a baby and providing support to victims and their families.